Welcome to another exciting episode on Dark Harry. Today, we're exploring a captivating tale called What If Harry Brought Pugsley to Hogwarts and They Destroyed Every Classroom. Filch quit before we begin. If you enjoy our content, please support us by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. It helps more than you know. And now, the story awaits. Chapter 1. The unexpected house guest. Harry Potter stared blankly at the ceiling of his bedroom at number 4 Privet Drive, counting the cracks for the 100th time that summer. 3 weeks into vacation, and he was already losing his mind. Boy! Get down here and weed the garden before the Masons arrive. Uncle Vernon's voice bellowed from downstairs. Harry groaned. The Masons again. Vernon had been obsessing about this dinner party for weeks, some wealthy construction couple who might place a massive drill order. Harry rolled off his bed and trudged downstairs, passing Dudley who was stuffing his face with cookies while watching TV. And stay out of sight once they arrive. Vernon hissed, his mustache quivering with intensity. Not a sound from you. Yes, Uncle Vernon, Harry muttered, heading for the back door. The July heat hit him like a wall as he stepped outside. Kneeling in the flower beds, Harry began yanking weeds, his mind wandering to Ron and Hermione. Neither had written much this summer. Even Hedwig seemed bored, hooting listlessly in her cage. A rustling sound from the hedge caught his attention. Harry froze, weed in hand. The rustling came again, followed by a small explosion that sent dirt flying. Harry scrambled backward. Drat! Wrong mixture, came a voice from behind the hedge. Harry crept forward, peering through the foliage. On the other side, a pale, round-faced boy about his age sat cross-legged on the ground. He wore black shorts and a striped shirt that looked like something from the previous century. Around him lay an assortment of vials, powders, and what looked suspiciously like sticks of dynamite. Hello, the boy said casually, not looking up from the small mortar and pestle he was using. Could you pass me that toad? It's trying to escape. Harry glanced down to see a warty toad inching toward his shoe. He picked it up, hesitated, then pushed through the hedge. Thanks, the boy said, taking the toad and dropping it into a small cage. I'm Pugsley. Pugsley Addams. Harry Potter, Harry replied, waiting for the usual reaction. It didn't come. You live in that boring house? Pugsley asked, nodding toward the Dursleys. Unfortunately. Thought so. I've been watching you. You look as miserable as I'd be in a place like that. Pugsley poured a purple powder into his mortar. Want to see something explode? Before Harry could answer, Aunt Petunia's voice shrieked from the back door. Harry! The Masons will be here in an hour. Are you finished yet? Almost. Harry called back. He turned to Pugsley. I should go. Why? They don't appreciate you anyway. Pugsley mixed his concoction with alarming speed. My family's renting the old Magnolia Crescent house for the summer. Mother wanted to experience suburban dullness. She finds it exotic. Harry couldn't help but smile. What are you making? Just a little something to liven up the neighborhood. My sister Wednesday is coming tomorrow, and I want to welcome her properly. Pugsley grinned, revealing slightly crooked teeth. Want to help? Harry glanced back at the Dursleys' house. The prospect of another evening locked in his room while Vernon kissed up to potential clients made the decision easy. Sure. But I need to finish weeding first or I'll never hear the end of it. I can help with that. Pugsley reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a small, shriveled hand. What's that? Thing's cousin. Not as lively, but useful for garden work. Pugsley set the hand down, and Harry watched in amazement as it began pulling weeds with surprising efficiency. Is that magic? Harry whispered, looking around nervously. Pugsley gave him an odd look. Of course it's magic. What else would it be? You're a wizard too, aren't you? I sensed it right away. Harry's jaw dropped. How did you, Addamses always know? Pugsley shrugged. We're connected to the otherworldly. Plus, you have a wand sticking out of your back pocket. Harry hastily tucked his wand deeper into his jeans. I'm not supposed to do magic outside school. School rules. Pugsley snorted. My family doesn't believe in magical restrictions. Magic is meant to be used, not locked away. He stood up, brushing dirt from his hands. Come on. Let's go to my place while Thing's cousin finishes here. But the Masons will never know you're gone if we're quick. Pugsley packed his vials and powders into a battered leather case. Unless you'd rather stay and listen to drill talk all night. Harry hesitated only a second longer. Lead the way. The old house on Magnolia Crescent had always been avoided by the neighborhood. Rumors of hauntings and structural instability kept most people away. As they approached, Harry understood why the Addams family had chosen it. The place looked like it belonged in a horror film, with its sagging roof and overgrown garden. Mother says it's disappointingly cheerful, but it'll do for summer, Pugsley commented as they walked up the cracked pathway. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a tall, pale woman in a tight black dress. Pugsley, darling, you've brought a friend. Her voice was silky and precise. How unusual. This is Harry Potter. He lives with those boring people in the matching houses. He's a wizard. How delightful. Mrs. Addams extended a hand to Harry. Her grip was cold but surprisingly strong. I'm Morticia Addams. Please, come in. My husband Gomez is in the basement, attempting to find the source of that ghastly fresh air. The interior of the house was unlike anything Harry had seen. What had once been a typical suburban home was now decorated with strange artifacts, bizarre paintings, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a medieval dungeon. A suit of armor stood in the corner of the living room, and Harry could swear its helmet turned to follow him. Gomez. Morticia called down a dark stairwell. Pugsley has brought a wizard friend. Thundering footsteps preceded the arrival of a mustachioed man in a pinstriped suit, his hair slicked back and a wild gleam in his eye. Magnificent. A new blood to join our revelry. He seized Harry's hand and pumped it enthusiastically. Gomez Addams, at your service. Do you prefer stabbing or shooting? Father, Harry goes to a magic school, Pugsley interrupted. They use wands there. A traditionalist. Gomez slapped Harry on the back. Splendid. Though nothing beats the feel of cold steel in your hand, my boy. Gomez, you're frightening the child, Morticia said, though she didn't sound particularly concerned. Not at all, Harry replied, finding himself oddly comfortable with the Addamses' eccentricity. After facing Voldemort and a three-headed dog, a family of Gothic enthusiasts hardly seemed threatening. We're making exploding potions, Pugsley announced. Can we use the attic? Of course, darling, Morticia said. Just try not to disturb your Uncle Fester's experimental fungi. They're in a very sensitive growth phase. As they climbed the creaking stairs to the attic, Harry couldn't help asking, are your parents wizards too? Not exactly. Pugsley pushed open a heavy door, revealing a cluttered space filled with even stranger items than downstairs. We're Addamses. Our magic is family magic, passed down through blood and bone. We don't need wands or schools, though I've been curious about formal magical education. So you don't go to a wizarding school? I've had tutors. Granny teaches potions and curses. Uncle Fester handles explosives and electricity. Father teaches dueling and financial chaos. Pugsley cleared a space on a dusty table. What's your school like? Harry spent the next hour telling Pugsley about Hogwarts while they mixed increasingly volatile substances. He found Pugsley to be surprisingly knowledgeable about certain magical concepts, though his approach was wildly different from anything taught at Hogwarts. So this Snape person doesn't let you experiment? Pugsley asked, carefully adding a green liquid to their mixture. Experiment? He barely lets us breathe. Harry laughed. Deviation from the recipe means detention. Boring. Pugsley made a face. Half the fun is finding out what happens when you mix unexpected things. Usually in potions class, what happens is melted cauldrons and trips to the hospital wing. Exactly. Pugsley's eyes lit up. How else do you learn? Their conversation was interrupted by a small explosion from their concoction, which turned bright orange and began emitting purple smoke. Perfect. Pugsley exclaimed, carefully pouring it into several small glass vials. These will make excellent welcome gifts for Wednesday. Harry glanced at his watch and jumped up. I need to get back. The Masons will be arriving any minute. They raced back to Privet Drive, Pugsley insisting on accompanying Harry, in case of ambush. The garden was immaculate, every weed removed with surgical precision. The disembodied hand was nowhere to be seen. Things cousin likes to wander, Pugsley explained, noticing Harry's concerned look. He'll turn up eventually. Harry heard Vernon's forced laugh from inside, the Masons had arrived. I need to go in through the back and up to my room without being seen. Or, Pugsley suggested, you could come back to our house for dinner. Mother's making her special swamp fungus stew. I can't, Harry said regretfully. My aunt and uncle would kill me if they found out I left. Literally? That's encouraging. No, not literally, Harry clarified, though sometimes he wondered. Pity. Pugsley looked thoughtful. Well, I'll be around tomorrow if you want to continue our experiments. We could try something really interesting with those garden gnomes I saw in the next yard. They're not magical gnomes, just statues, Harry explained. Even better. Inanimate objects are harder to animate correctly, more of a challenge. With that disturbing thought, they parted ways. Harry snuck in through the back door and up to his bedroom just as Vernon was showing the Masons into the living room. Lying on his bed, Harry couldn't help smiling. For the first time since summer began, he wasn't bored out of his mind. Strange as they were, the Addams family, or at least Pugsley, had made Surrey interesting. A tapping at his window startled him. Harry expected to see Hedwig returning from a hunt, but instead found Pugsley perched precariously on a gnarled tree branch that definitely hadn't been there that morning. I forgot to give you this, Pugsley whispered as Harry opened the window. He handed over a small vial of the orange potion. In case those Dursley people become too unbearable. What does it do? Harry asked, examining the glowing liquid. Nothing permanent, Pugsley assured him with a grin that wasn't remotely reassuring. Just drop it in their food if you need a distraction. See you tomorrow. He disappeared back down the mysteriously appeared tree, which seemed to retract into the ground after he reached the bottom. Harry stared at the vial, then carefully placed it in his sock drawer. He had a feeling the rest of the summer had just gotten much more interesting. The next morning, Harry awoke to a commotion downstairs. Vernon was bellowing about something on the front lawn. Harry peeked out his window and had to stifle a laugh. Dozens of garden gnomes, the ordinary concrete kind, were arranged in a circle on the Dursleys' pristine lawn, all facing the house. In the center lay what appeared to be the remains of a small bonfire. Potter! Vernon roared. Harry quickly dressed and headed downstairs, composing his most innocent expression. Yes, Uncle Vernon. Did you do this? Vernon's face was an alarming shade of purple as he pointed at the gnome circle. No, sir. I was in my room all night. Don't lie to me, boy. Who else would pull such a freakish stunt? I really didn't, the neighbors are staring. Petunia hissed, peering through the curtains. Vernon, do something. Vernon stomped outside and began kicking the gnomes over, cursing under his breath. As Harry watched from the doorway, he noticed Pugsley and a thin, pale girl with long black braids observing from across the street, both looking supremely satisfied. When Vernon wasn't looking, Harry slipped away and crossed to meet them. "Morning, Harry," Pugsley said cheerfully. "This is my sister, Wednesday. She arrived last night." Wednesday regarded Harry with dark, unblinking eyes. "Pugsley says you have potential. I reserve judgment." "Thanks, I think." Harry glanced back at Vernon, who was now loading gnomes into a wheelbarrow. "Nice work with the gnomes." "Traditional Addams welcome ritual," Wednesday explained. "Usually we use real gnomes, but these were surprisingly responsive to the animation potion." "Animation potion?" "Just wait," Pugsley said, checking his watch. As if on cue, the gnomes in Vernon's wheelbarrow began to twitch. Vernon froze, staring in horror as the concrete figures slowly turned their heads to look at him. With a shriek that Harry would treasure forever, Vernon dropped the wheelbarrow and ran back into the house. Phase 1 complete, Wednesday noted with cold satisfaction. "Now we begin the haunting." "Haunting?" Harry asked nervously. "Nothing serious," Pugsley assured him. "Just enough to make them question their sanity." "I'm not sure that's a good idea," Harry said, though he couldn't deny feeling a certain thrill at the thought of the Dursleys being tormented. "They already hate anything magical." "Precisely why they need education," Wednesday replied. "Ignorance should be painful." A screech from inside the house suggested Petunia had discovered something unpleasant. "Ah, she found things, cousin, in the cookie jar," Pugsley nodded approvingly. "You two are going to get me locked in my room for the rest of summer," Harry groaned, though he couldn't stop grinning. "Then you'll come stay with us," Wednesday stated, as if it were already decided. "Our house has 17 unused bedrooms, 6 of which aren't actively haunted." Before Harry could respond, a tawny owl swooped down and dropped a letter at his feet. Harry immediately recognized the Hogwarts seal. "Mail by owl," Wednesday observed. "Efficient, if theatrical." Harry tore open the envelope, his eyes widening as he read. "What's wrong?" Pugsley asked, noting Harry's expression. "It's from Professor McGonagall. There's been some kind of magical incident detected at Privet Drive. They think I did it, but since it's not standard wand magic, they're sending someone to investigate." Harry looked up, panic setting in. "They'll be here tomorrow." "Interesting," Wednesday said, showing the first hint of emotion, something resembling scientific curiosity. "Their detection systems picked up our family magic." "This is bad," Harry muttered. "I'm already in trouble for the house elf incident last week. Dobby levitated a pudding to get me in trouble, and the ministry sent a warning." "House elf?" Pugsley perked up. "We had one once." Wednesday convinced it that freedom could be found in the afterlife. Wednesday shrugged. He seemed disappointed to discover I was wrong. Another shriek from the Dursley house, followed by Dudley wailing about something in his bed. "We should probably go," Pugsley said reluctantly. "The tarantula migration won't last much longer." "Wait," Harry said, an idea forming. "If I'm already in trouble, and they're sending someone anyway." He looked at the Addams siblings. "Want to see some real magic?" Pugsley's face lit up. "You'll do wand magic for us?" "Better." Harry grinned. "I'll show you my school books, magical supplies, everything. The Dursleys made me lock it all in the cupboard under the stairs, but if I'm already getting investigated." "Breaking rules and potentially laws," Wednesday nodded approvingly. "Perhaps you do have potential after all." The three made their way to the Dursley house, slipping in through the back door while the family was occupied with the gnome situation out front. Harry led them to the cupboard under the stairs, his old bedroom, and pulled a hairpin from Wednesday's offered hand. "Simple locks are beneath you," she commented as he picked it. "Haven't learned magical lock-picking yet," Harry admitted, swinging the door open to reveal his trunk. For the next hour, while the Dursleys dealt with animated garden decorations and mysteriously appearing insects, Harry showed the Addams siblings his wizarding supplies. Pugsley was fascinated by the potion's ingredients, while Wednesday spent an unsettling amount of time examining Harry's wand. "You and Phoenix Feather," she murmured, running her pale finger along its length. "Death and rebirth in one instrument." "It's holly, actually," Harry corrected. Wednesday looked unconvinced. "Holly is for protection. You don't strike me as someone who needs protecting." The sound of the front door slamming made them all freeze. "Boy!" Vernon bellowed. "Where are you?" "Cupboard," Pugsley whispered, pulling something from his pocket. It looked like a small, shriveled apple. "Drop this and run." "What is it?" "Instant darkness. Family recipe." Harry hesitated only a moment before taking it. He'd had enough of the Dursleys, especially with magical authorities coming tomorrow anyway. "Potter." Vernon was stomping down the hallway. Harry squeezed the shriveled apple. It burst, releasing a cloud of dense, black smoke that filled the hallway instantly. Vernon's shouts turned to coughs and curses. "This way!" Harry whispered, grabbing his invisibility cloak from the trunk and throwing it over the three of them. It barely covered them all, but they managed to shuffle out the back door while the Dursleys stumbled around in the magical darkness. "That was brilliant!" Pugsley exclaimed once they were safely back at the Addams house. "What else have you got in that trunk?" Harry had brought his school trunk with them, dragging it across the neighborhood under the cloak. Now, in the relative safety of the Addams living room, he opened it fully. "Everything I need for wizarding school," Harry explained, pulling out books, robes, and his broomstick. "This is my Nimbus 2000. Best racing broom there is." "You fly on it?" Pugsley asked, examining the broom with interest. "It's the best feeling in the world," Harry confirmed, then remembered something. "Wait, if your family does magic, don't you fly too?" "Mother prefers moonlight gliding," Wednesday explained, paging through Harry's potions textbook with a critical expression. "Father has a magic carpet he smuggled from Morocco. I find personal levitation more elegant than broom dependency." "You can levitate yourself?" Harry asked, impressed. Wednesday shrugged. "Only on leap years and during lunar eclipses. It's more trouble than it's worth." "This is all so structured," Pugsley commented, flipping through the standard book of spells. "Where's the creativity?" "That's what I like about Hogwarts, though," Harry said. "Everything makes sense there. There are rules and reasons." "Rules are for breaking," came Addams' voice as he burst into the room, fencing foil in hand. "Ah, young Potter has brought his magical arsenal." "Splendid." He snatched up Harry's wand and gave it a wave. Nothing happened. "Temperamental little stick," Gomez commented, handing it back. "Give us a demonstration, my boy." "I'm not supposed to, restrictions again." Gomez looked disappointed. "What's the point of power if not to use it?" "If I do magic outside school, I could be expelled," Harry explained. "Then we'll homeschool you," Gomez declared. "Fester is an excellent teacher. Only lost 3 students last year." "Lost?" Harry asked nervously. "They turned up eventually," Morticia said, gliding into the room. "Most of them with all their original limbs." A loud crash from upstairs interrupted them. "That'll be Uncle Fester," Pugsley said casually. "He's trying to recreate lightning in bottles again." Another crash, followed by maniacal laughter. "Successfully, it seems," Wednesday added. "Harry, dear," Morticia said, examining him with those penetrating dark eyes, "Pugsley tells us you're having trouble with your guardians." "The Dursleys aren't so bad," Harry lied automatically. "They just don't like magic." "Don't like magic?" Gomez looked genuinely perplexed. "What kind of defective humans are they?" "The worst kind," Harry admitted. "And now they're going to kill me for setting off that smoke bomb and running away with my trunk." "No one's killing anyone without proper ceremony," Morticia assured him, which wasn't exactly reassuring. "You'll stay for dinner," and we'll sort this out. Harry knew he should return to Privet Drive, face the Dursleys' wrath, and prepare for whoever the Ministry was sending tomorrow. But the thought of spending more time with the Addamses was too tempting. I guess I could stay a little longer. Wonderful. Gomez clapped him on the back. Lurch is preparing his special strychnine surprise. It's not actually strychnine, Pugsley whispered to Harry. That's just what we call it to make guests nervous. It's mostly nightshade. That's not better. Harry whispered back. Don't worry, Wednesday said flatly. We've developed immunity through generations of careful poisoning. You'll only experience minor hallucinations. Before Harry could respond to this disturbing information, the doorbell rang, a sound like a funeral dirge. I'll get it. Pugsley raced to the door, returning moments later with a strange expression. Harry, it's for you. Standing in the Addams entryway was Professor McGonagall, looking severely out of place in her emerald green robes. Mr. Potter, she said, lips thinned in disapproval. Would you care to explain why your relative's home is filled with animated garden ornaments, a disembodied hand is rearranging their kitchen cabinets, and your bedroom is empty? Harry's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Professor McGonagall, I presume. Gomez stepped forward, extending his hand. Gomez Addams, at your service. What brings such a distinguished witch to our humble abode? McGonagall's eyes narrowed as she took in Gomez, then shifted to the rest of the unusual family. I was scheduled to investigate an unusual magical occurrence tomorrow, but the situation has evidently escalated. Wonderful timing. Gomez exclaimed. You'll join us for dinner. I'm afraid I must decline, Mr. Addams. I'm here to retrieve Mr. Potter and sort out this magical disturbance. We caused the disturbance, Wednesday stated matter-of-factly. Harry is innocent. McGonagall raised an eyebrow. And you are? Wednesday Addams. This is my brother Pugsley. We're responsible for the animation charm, the smoke bomb, and the tarantula migration. The disembodied hand belongs to us as well, though technically it's autonomous. Harry stared at Wednesday in shock. He'd never heard anyone confess so directly to a teacher before. I see. McGonagall's expression was unreadable. And are you aware, Miss Addams, that underage magic is strictly prohibited outside of wizarding schools? We don't attend wizarding school, Pugsley chimed in. We're homeschooled in the family traditions. Family traditions? McGonagall's gaze swept over the bizarre decorations of the Addams home. The Addams family has practiced our own form of magic for generations, Morticia explained, stepping forward. We don't use wands or follow ministry restrictions. Our children are taught as we were taught. McGonagall frowned. I'm not familiar with the Addams name in wizarding genealogy. We exist in the shadows between worlds, Gomez declared dramatically. Neither fully of the wizarding community nor entirely separate from it. They're like me, Harry found himself saying. Not fitting in completely anywhere. McGonagall's expression softened slightly. Be that as it may, Mr. Potter, you still need to return to your relatives. And this magical disruption needs to be set right. Professor, Harry said desperately, couldn't I just go to Hogwarts early? Or to the Weasleys? The Dursleys are furious with me now. Due to no fault of your own, it seems, McGonagall said, giving the Addams siblings a stern look. However, there are procedures to follow. You cannot simply. A tremendous crash from upstairs interrupted her, followed by a flash of light that briefly illuminated the whole house. Success! Came a triumphant cry. Uncle Fester has achieved breakthrough, Wednesday explained to McGonagall's startled expression. I think, McGonagall said firmly, that it would be best if Mr. Potter did come back to Hogwarts with me immediately. This environment seems unnecessarily stimulating. Harry's heart leapt. Really? I can go back early. Under the circumstances, yes. I believe Hagrid would appreciate some help preparing for the new term. McGonagall turned to Morticia. Mrs. Addams, I must insist that you restrain your family's magical activities in this Muggle neighborhood. Of course, Professor, Morticia agreed smoothly. We meant no harm. The children were simply expressing their natural talents. Harry, Pugsley said suddenly, take me with you to Hogwarts. What? Harry and McGonagall said simultaneously. I want to see a real wizarding school. Pugsley insisted. Mother, Father, may I go? Just for a visit? McGonagall was already shaking her head. Out of the question. Hogwarts is not a tourist attraction, and the new term hasn't begun yet. Actually, Gomez mused, stroking his mustache, a cultural exchange could be educational. The Addams family has never formally engaged with the wand-wielding community. It would broaden his horizons, Morticia added. And we've always encouraged the children to explore different magical traditions. I don't have the authority to invite unauthorized visitors to Hogwarts, McGonagall stated firmly. Perhaps Albus does. Gomez suggested. I believe he and Great-Aunt Desdemona corresponded about alchemical theory in the 1930s. McGonagall's eyes widened slightly. You know Albus Dumbledore? Know him? We hosted him for the most delightful midnight séance during the Grindelwald affair. Gomez pulled out a pocket watch. I should contact him directly. Been too long since we've chatted about the metaphysical properties of spectral manifestation. Harry watched in amazement as McGonagall's resolve visibly wavered. I suppose I could consult with the headmaster. If he has a connection with your family. Excellent. Gomez clapped his hands together. Pugsley, pack your essentials. Only the most explosive items, mind you. Mr. Addams, McGonagall interjected, I have not agreed to anything yet. Details, details. Gomez waved dismissively. Adventure awaits the bold. While the adults continued to debate, Pugsley pulled Harry aside. This is perfect. I've always wanted to see a real wizarding school. Pugsley, I don't think McGonagall is going to allow it, Harry whispered. Hogwarts is really strict about who gets in. Leave it to Father, Pugsley said confidently. He has a gift for getting his way. It's a family trait, persistence unto death. What about Wednesday? Harry asked, noticing the girl watching them with her usual unnerving stare. I have no interest in structured education, she stated. I prefer my independent studies. Currently, I'm researching the regenerative properties of severed limbs. Harry decided not to ask for details. An hour later, after a fluke call that Harry wasn't privy to, McGonagall emerged from the Addams fireplace looking slightly dazed. The headmaster has, against my better judgment, approved a 2-week educational visit for young Mr. Addams, she announced. As a gesture of international magical cooperation. Pugsley punched the air triumphantly while Wednesday looked vaguely disappointed that she hadn't been included. Splendid! Gomez exclaimed. The Addams tradition continues to infiltrate hallowed institutions. Your great-grandfather would be proud, my boy. He nearly brought down Durmstrang in 1897. Literally brought down, Morticia added with a reminiscent smile. The East Wing never fully recovered. McGonagall's expression suggested she was already regretting this decision. Mr. Potter, Mr. Addams, please gather your belongings. We'll be departing shortly. I still need to inform your relatives, Mr. Potter. Can't we just leave them a note? Harry suggested hopefully. That would be impolite, Wednesday stated. A proper goodbye requires at least one curse or hex. We will do nothing of the sort, McGonagall said firmly. I will explain the situation to your aunt and uncle personally, Mr. Potter. Good luck, Harry muttered. They're not big on listening to explanations from wizards. McGonagall's tight smile suggested the Dursleys would be listening whether they wanted to or not. While McGonagall went to Privet Drive, Harry helped Pugsley pack. The items Pugsley considered essential were concerning, to say the least. Do you really need 3 different types of explosive powders? Harry asked as Pugsley stuffed vials into his battered suitcase. Absolutely. Different situations require different blast radiuses. Pugsley added what looked like a mummified bat to the collection. This is so exciting. Will I get to see the giant squid? Granny says all proper magical schools have dangerous aquatic creatures. Probably, Harry admitted. Though we're not supposed to get too close. Rules again, Pugsley sighed. So limiting. McGonagall returned looking distinctly ruffled, though there was a hint of satisfaction in her expression. Your relatives have been informed of your early departure, she told Harry. They seemed, unexpectedly amenable to the arrangement. Harry suspected, amenable, wasn't the word the Dursleys would use, but he wasn't about to question his good fortune. After dramatic goodbyes from the Addams family, including Fester who had appeared covered in soot with his light bulb collection, McGonagall led Harry and Pugsley outside. We'll be using a portkey, she explained, holding out an ordinary-looking teacup. Have either of you traveled by portkey before? I was born during a portkey malfunction, Pugsley offered. Mother was halfway to Montenegro when I decided to make my appearance. The resulting temporal distortion aged the midwife 60 years instantly. McGonagall stared at him for a moment, then shook her head slightly. Just hold on tightly to the cup, both of you. Harry and Pugsley grabbed the portkey. The familiar hook-behind navel sensation jerked them away from Privet Drive and into the unknown adventure ahead. They landed with a thud on the outskirts of Hogwarts grounds. Harry, somewhat used to magical travel by now, managed to stay on his feet. Pugsley not only remained standing but looked disappointed. That was it? Granny's teleportation spells usually involve more screaming and at least one temporary dismemberment. McGonagall's lips thinned further. Hogwarts transportation is designed for safety, Mr. Addams, not theatrics. As they walked toward the castle, Harry felt the familiar rush of joy at seeing Hogwarts again. The ancient stone walls and towering spires stood majestically against the summer sky, magical and imposing. It's magnificent, Pugsley whispered, for once looking genuinely impressed. It has a proper sense of dread and foreboding. That's not usually how people describe it, Harry said with a smile. Then they're not looking properly, Pugsley replied. I can practically taste the centuries of magical accidents, mysterious disappearances, and fatal mishaps. Mr. Addams, McGonagall interjected, I feel I should make something very clear before we enter the castle. Hogwarts has rules, strict ones, designed to protect students and staff. During your stay, you will be expected to follow these rules. Of course, Professor, Pugsley agreed with angelic innocence that didn't fool Harry for a second. Furthermore, McGonagall continued, any experiments, potions, or activities that might cause damage to the castle or harm to its inhabitants are strictly forbidden. Define harm, Pugsley requested seriously. McGonagall stopped walking to fix him with her sternest gaze. Mr. Addams, I begin to understand why the headmaster found this educational exchange amusing. Let me be perfectly clear, at Hogwarts, we do not explode, implode, disintegrate, transmogrify, liquefy, or otherwise alter any person, creature, or property without express permission. That doesn't leave much room for discovery, Pugsley muttered. Discovery at Hogwarts happens in a controlled educational environment, McGonagall stated firmly. Now, shall we continue, or would you prefer to return home? Continue. Pugsley said quickly. I'll adapt to your methods. Temporarily. As they approached the massive front doors, Harry wondered if Hogwarts was ready for Pugsley Addams. Somehow, he doubted it. Hogwarts during summer was eerily quiet. Their footsteps echoed in the empty corridors as McGonagall led them through the castle. Most of the staff are away until term begins, she explained. Currently, only Hagrid, Mr. Filch, and a few others remain. At the mention of Filch, Harry and Pugsley exchanged glances. Harry knew that look in Pugsley's eye. It spelled trouble for the cantankerous caretaker. "Mr. Addams will stay in the Gryffindor dormitory with you, Potter," McGonagall continued. "I trust you'll help him understand our ways." "Yes, Professor," Harry agreed, though he wasn't sure if he'd be restraining Pugsley or joining him in whatever chaos was brewing. As they turned a corner, they nearly collided with Argus Filch. The caretaker's perpetually sour expression darkened further at the sight of Harry. "Students? Already?" he spat, Mrs. Norris winding between his legs. "Term doesn't start for weeks." "Mr. Potter will be assisting Hagrid with some preparations," McGonagall explained. "And this is Mr. Addams, a visitor studying our educational methods." Filch's eyes narrowed suspiciously as he examined Pugsley. "Another troublemaker, I'll wager." "I can always tell." Pugsley smiled his most disturbing smile. "I look forward to learning about your cleaning techniques, Mr. Filch. I've always been fascinated by the removal of mysterious stains." Filch took an instinctive step backward. "Keep him away from my supplies, Professor." "I mean it." As Filch shuffled away, muttering darkly about chains and dungeons, Pugsley watched him go with undisguised interest. "He has potential," Pugsley decided. "Reminds me of Granny when she's planning exhumations." McGonagall sighed deeply. "Mr. Addams, please remember our conversation about causing harm." "Of course, Professor. I wouldn't dream of harming Mr. Filch." Pugsley's innocent expression returned. "Traumatize, perhaps. Terrify, possibly. But harm? Never." McGonagall closed her eyes briefly, as if praying for patience. "Potter, take Mr. Addams to the dormitory. I need to inform Hagrid of your arrival and prepare him." As McGonagall strode away, Harry led Pugsley toward Gryffindor Tower. "You really shouldn't antagonize Filch," he advised. "He can make life miserable here." "He was antagonizing himself," Pugsley replied. "I merely acknowledged his natural state of bitterness. Besides, people like him are always more fun when provoked slightly." They reached the fat lady's portrait, which swung open at Harry's password despite looking surprised to see students so early. The Gryffindor common room was exactly as Harry remembered, comfortable, warm, and welcoming. Pugsley, however, looked around with disappointment. Where are the shadows? The cobwebs? The sense of impending doom? "It's not supposed to have those things," Harry explained, leading him up to the boys' dormitory. "It's meant to feel like home." "Exactly my point," Pugsley said, dropping his suitcase on an empty bed. "Home should have all those elements." As Pugsley unpacked his strange collection of items, Harry realized just how different their worlds were. Yet somehow, he felt more comfortable with Pugsley's oddness than with the Dursleys' forced normalcy. "So," Pugsley said, placing what looked like a shrunken head on his bedside table, "when do we start exploring?" "I want to see the dungeons first." "We should probably wait for McGonagall's permission," Harry suggested half-heartedly. Pugsley stared at him. "You defeated a dark wizard and fought a three-headed dog, but you want permission to walk around an empty castle?" Put that way, it did sound ridiculous. Harry grinned. "You're right. Let's explore. But maybe we should avoid the dungeons first. Snape might be around. The boring potions teacher. Perfect. I have several suggestions for improving his curriculum." Harry could only imagine what those improvements might entail. "Let's start with the kitchens instead. I'm starving, and the house elves make the best food." "House elves," Pugsley nodded. "Wednesday will be disappointed she missed meeting them. She has theories about their evolutionary relationship to goblins." The kitchen expedition was a success. The house elves were delighted to see Harry and equally fascinated by Pugsley, who asked detailed questions about the more poisonous ingredients they kept in stock, for educational purposes only. Loaded with sandwiches and cakes, they continued their tour of the empty castle. Harry showed Pugsley the classrooms, the great hall, and even the library, where Pugsley spent a concerning amount of time in the restricted section before Harry dragged him away. Those books were just getting interesting, Pugsley complained. The one about intestinal transfiguration had actual moving diagrams. That's why it's in the restricted section, Harry pointed out. Come on, let's go see Hagrid. He's probably expecting us by now. They were crossing the entrance hall when a familiar, unwelcome voice stopped them cold. Potter. What an unpleasant surprise. Professor Snape stood at the top of the dungeon stairs, his black robes and sallow face as intimidating as ever. Professor, Harry acknowledged stiffly. I didn't know you were here. Evidently. Snape's cold gaze shifted to Pugsley. And who is this? Before Harry could answer, Pugsley stepped forward and extended his hand. Pugsley Addams. I'm here to study your educational methods. I'm particularly interested in potions. Something flickered in Snape's expression, surprise, perhaps, or suspicion. He ignored the outstretched hand. Addams? Of the American Addams family? Pugsley nodded, looking pleased to be recognized. Your grandmother wrote a rather unique treatise on the use of nightshade varieties in rejuvenation potions. Snape's tone was difficult to read. Highly unorthodox. Some would say dangerous. Granny will be delighted you've read her work. Pugsley beamed. The ministry tried to ban it after the test subject incident, but she always says knowledge should be free, even if it occasionally results in spontaneous combustion. Snape's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Indeed. Perhaps you will visit my classroom during your stay, Mr. Addams. It would be educational to discuss your family's approaches. Harry stared in disbelief. Was Snape actually being civil? I'd be honored, Professor, Pugsley replied. I've brought some of Granny's special ingredients if you'd like to experiment. Snape gave Harry a dismissive glance. Try not to destroy the castle before term begins, Potter. Mr. Addams, I look forward to our discussion. With a swirl of black robes, Snape disappeared back down to the dungeons. He likes me, Pugsley declared. That's impossible, Harry said, still stunned. Snape doesn't like anyone, especially not friends of mine. We share an appreciation for the darker aspects of potion making, Pugsley explained. It creates an instant bond. Harry shook his head in amazement as they continued toward Hagrid's hut. Just when I think things can't get stranger. Hagrid was even more welcoming than usual, enveloping Harry in a bone-crushing hug before pumping Pugsley's hand enthusiastically. An Addams at Hogwarts. Neve thought I'd see the day, the giant man exclaimed. Your great-uncle Enoch once sent me the most fascinating specimen, grew to the size of a hippogriff before it ate itself inside out. That sounds like Uncle Enoch, Pugsley agreed, looking around Hagrid's hut with obvious approval. He was always experimenting with self-consuming organisms. Harry settled into a chair, watching in amazement as Hagrid and Pugsley launched into a detailed discussion of dangerous creatures. Apparently, the Addams family had a long history of breeding animals that defied both magical classification and common sense. "Ye must come with me to the forest tomorrow," Hagrid was saying. "Got a new nest o' acromantulas that could use check-in. Giant spiders. Excellent." Pugsley rubbed his hands together. "Wednesday will be so jealous. She's been trying to breed venomous arachnids for years." The forest is forbidden to students, Harry felt obligated to point out, then caught himself. "But I guess since it's summer and you're with Hagrid. Rules are more like suggestions when there's learnin' to be done," Hagrid said with a wink that did nothing to ease Harry's concerns. As they headed back to the castle at dusk, Harry realized he was genuinely happy for the first time all summer. Yes, Pugsley was strange and potentially dangerous, but he was also interesting, accepting, and utterly fearless, qualities Harry admired. "This is going to be the best 2 weeks ever," Harry declared. "Especially once we start redecorating," Pugsley agreed. "Redecorating?" Just small improvements. Nothing structural. Well, mostly nothing structural. Harry decided not to ask for details. Some things were better left as surprises. Later that night, as they settled into their beds in the empty Gryffindor dormitory, Pugsley turned to Harry with an uncharacteristically serious expression. "Thanks for bringing me here, Harry. No one's ever invited me to their school before." "Technically, McGonagall invited you," Harry pointed out. "After you showed me your world," Pugsley insisted. "Most people find my family too intense." Harry thought about his life with the Dursleys, about being the boy who lived, about never quite fitting in anywhere. "I know what that's like," he said quietly. "Being different." "Different is better," Pugsley declared. "Normal people don't make history. Or destroy classrooms," Harry suggested with a grin. Pugsley's answering smile was decidedly wicked. "That starts tomorrow. I've already planned our first experiment in the Transfiguration classroom. How do you feel about temporarily animated furniture?" As Pugsley outlined his plans, growing more elaborate and concerning by the minute, Harry realized that Hogwarts was about to experience something entirely new. And despite knowing he should probably try to rein in Pugsley's more destructive impulses, he couldn't help feeling excited. After all, what was the worst that could happen? In the darkness of his office, Argus Filch shivered suddenly, as if someone had walked over his grave. Mrs. Norris meowed questioningly. "I don't know what it is, my sweet," he muttered, stroking her dust-colored fur. "But something wicked this way comes. Something worse than Peeves, worse than those Weasley twins." He glanced at his resignation letter, half-written on the desk before him. He'd been contemplating leaving Hogwarts for years, but something always held him back. "Maybe this year will be different," he told Mrs. Norris hopefully. "Maybe this year they'll finally give me permission to hang troublemakers by their thumbs." Little did he know how soon he'd be finishing that letter. Chapter 2, Classroom Catastrophes. Harry woke to the sound of bubbling. Not the gentle, soothing kind you'd hear from a brook or a fish tank, but the aggressive, worrying kind that typically preceded an explosion. He cracked one eye open to find Pugsley hunched over a makeshift cauldron balanced precariously on his nightstand. "Morning, Harry." Pugsley didn't look up from his work. "Sleep well?" "I've been up since 4 experimenting with local ingredients." Harry sat up groggily. "What local ingredients?" "Just some moss I scraped off the castle walls, a few interesting mushrooms from behind Hagrid's hut, and that weird slime that drips from the gargoyle on the 3rd floor." Pugsley stirred the mixture with what looked suspiciously like a human femur. "I'm trying to recreate Granny's awakening potion, but with a Scottish twist." "Do I want to know what an awakening potion does?" Harry asked, reaching for his glasses. "It's for waking the dead, obviously." Pugsley sprinkled something that looked like ground beetle wings into the cauldron. "But my version should just cause temporary reanimation. Nothing permanent." Harry jumped out of bed. "Pugsley, you can't reanimate the dead at Hogwarts." "Why not? The castle's full of ghosts already. What's a few more temporarily mobile corpses?" Pugsley looked genuinely confused. "Because." Harry struggled to find a reason that would make sense to an Addams. "Because Dumbledore wouldn't approve." Pugsley considered this. "The one with the impressive beard and twinkling eyes? Father speaks very highly of him. Says he has a delightful sense of the macabre." "Yes, that's him. And he has rules about necromancy. Very strict ones." "Ichem. I suppose I can respect that." Pugsley looked disappointed but dumped the potion out the window anyway. A distant sizzling sound followed, along with what might have been a startled yelp. "So, what's on the agenda today?" "More exploration. Professor McGonagall mentioned something about helping prepare classrooms for the term." Harry nodded, relieved to have averted at least one magical disaster before breakfast. "We're supposed to help organize supplies. Nothing dangerous." "We'll see about that," Pugsley grinned, reaching for his clothes. After a quick breakfast in the Great Hall, where Pugsley managed to charm the house elves into serving him something that smoked ominously and smelled like burnt rubber, they reported to Professor McGonagall's classroom. "Ah, Potter, Addams. Punctual, good." McGonagall gestured to several boxes of transfiguration supplies. "These need sorting and arranging in the student cupboards. The labels will tell you where everything goes." She fixed Pugsley with a stern look. "Mr. Addams, these materials are to be sorted only. Not tested, not improved upon, not experimented with in any way. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, Professor," Pugsley replied with an angelic smile that made Harry nervous. "I'll return in 1 hour to check your progress. Mr. Potter, I trust you'll ensure things stay orderly." With that, McGonagall swept from the room, her emerald robes billowing behind her. The moment the door closed, Pugsley dove into the boxes with alarming enthusiasm. "Look at these matchsticks. Perfect kindling for a controlled classroom fire. And these needles. Wednesday would love them for her pain tolerance experiments." "Pugsley," Harry warned, "we promised to just sort things. And we will. After I've examined everything properly." He pulled out a stack of blank parchment. "What do they use this for?" "Students practice turning it into other things. It's basic transfiguration." Pugsley looked disappointed. "That's it? No spontaneous origami? No paper creatures that come to life and do your bidding?" "Well, that's advanced transfiguration," Harry admitted. "We don't learn that until later years. But it's possible." Pugsley's eyes lit up. "So theoretically, I could." "No," Harry said firmly, taking the parchment from him. "We're sorting, remember." For a few minutes, they worked in relative peace, organizing matchsticks, needles, buttons, and other transfiguration materials. Then Harry noticed Pugsley had gone suspiciously quiet. He turned to find his friend pointing his wand, which he definitely wasn't supposed to have, at a desk, muttering something that sounded ominously like an incantation. "Pugsley, what are you, too late?" The desk shuddered, then slowly rose on its 4 legs. Wood creaked as those legs bent into more animal-like joints. The desktop split down the middle, forming a massive mouth filled with freshly transfigured wooden teeth. "It worked!" Pugsley exclaimed delightedly. "Granny's partial animation spell combined with what I saw in your transfiguration book." The desk creature let out a growl that sounded like dragging furniture across a floor. "How do you undo it?" Harry asked, backing away slowly. "Undo it? Why would we undo it? He's perfect." Pugsley patted the desk creature's side. "I think I'll call him Splinter." Splinter. The desk turned its makeshift head toward Harry and growled again, taking an ominous step forward. "I don't think he likes me," Harry observed, reaching for his own wand. "Nonsense. He's just hungry. New animations always are." Pugsley looked around thoughtfully. "I wonder what desks eat." "They don't eat anything because they're supposed to be furniture." Harry raised his wand. Finite incantatem. Nothing happened. Splinter took another menacing step toward Harry. "Ah, that won't work," Pugsley said casually. "Family spells have their own countermeasures. Only the caster can reverse them." "Then reverse it." Harry jumped onto a chair as Splinter snapped its wooden jaws. "In a minute. I want to see if he can learn tricks first." Pugsley cleared his throat. "Splinter. Sit." The animated desk ignored him completely, now focused entirely on Harry. "His obedience needs work," Pugsley observed clinically. "Pugsley. Fine, fine." Pugsley waved his wand again and muttered something that sounded like Latin backwards. The desk froze mid-lunge, then slowly collapsed back into normal furniture, leaving a slightly chewed-looking desk where the creature had stood. "That was amazing." Pugsley beamed, examining his handiwork. Next time I'll try multiple desks at once. Maybe they'll form a pack hierarchy. There won't be a next time, Harry insisted, cautiously poking the now inanimate desk with his foot. McGonagall will kill us if she finds out. Only if she finds out, Pugsley winked. Don't worry, I'll fix the teeth marks. No one will ever know. Harry sighed, knowing this was only the beginning. Let's just finish sorting these supplies before she comes back. They managed to complete the task without further animated furniture incidents, though Harry had to stop Pugsley from pocketing several items, for later experimentation. When McGonagall returned, she seemed pleasantly surprised to find the classroom intact and the supplies properly organized. Well done, boys. Now, I believe Professor Sprout could use some assistance in the greenhouses. Potter, you know the way. As they headed across the grounds toward the greenhouses, Harry tried to impress upon Pugsley the importance of restraint. Herbology can be dangerous enough without adding explosions or animations, he explained. Some of these plants can kill you on their own. Excellent. Pugsley rubbed his hands together. Wednesday would love this class. She's been trying to breed carnivorous houseplants for years. Just promise me you won't animate anything, create anything, or experiment with anything while we're there. I promise to consider your request carefully, Pugsley replied solemnly, which wasn't remotely reassuring. Professor Sprout greeted them warmly, herbology gloves already covered in dirt. Ah, Harry. And you must be young Mr. Addams. Minerva warned me, informed me, about your visit. Pleased to meet you, Professor, Pugsley said, immediately distracted by the strange plants waving tentacle-like vines from their pots. Are those self-defense mechanisms or hunting appendages? Both, actually. Those are adolescent venomous tentacula. Fascinating creatures, they can distinguish between threats and food sources by scent alone. Professor Sprout beamed at Pugsley's interest. Do you have a background in herbology, Mr. Addams? Granny cultivates a garden of poisonous and carnivorous plants. I help with the feeding. Pugsley approached the tentacula, which seemed to sense something different about him and drew back slightly. These seem underdeveloped compared to Granny's fanged geraniums, though. Have you tried a fertilizer with higher nitrogen content? Maybe mixed with dragon dung and bone meal? Professor Sprout looked both impressed and slightly concerned. That's an interesting suggestion. We generally avoid accelerating growth too rapidly as it can make them unstable. That's the best part. Pugsley exclaimed. Granny's most aggressive specimens have escaped the greenhouse 3 times. The last one almost got the mailman. Harry cleared his throat loudly. Didn't you say we were here to help with preparations, Professor? Yes, yes. Sprout tore her gaze away from Pugsley, who was now cooing at the tentacula like it was a puppy. I need these mandrake pots prepared for the new second years. Fresh soil mixture in each, with the proper growth supplements. She demonstrated the correct soil mixture, then left them to fill dozens of pots while she dealt with a minor crisis involving bouncing bulbs in the next greenhouse over. Mandrakes? Pugsley examined the empty pots with interest. The screaming root babies that can kill you? My kind of plant. They're juvenile ones, not fully grown, Harry explained, shoveling soil mixture into pots. But we still wear earmuffs when repotting them. Shame. I've been working on my tolerance to fatal screams. Uncle Fester says I'm up to 14 seconds now before losing consciousness. For a while, they worked in companionable silence. Harry began to think they might actually complete a task without incident. Then he noticed Pugsley discreetly adding something to several pots. What is that? He demanded. Just a growth accelerant of my own design, Pugsley explained, sprinkling a glittering powder into the soil. Made from crushed fairy wings, dragon scales, and a few other ingredients Wednesday mailed me this morning. Your sister mailed you ingredients? How? Family Raven. Much more reliable than owls, they enjoy delivering disturbing packages. Pugsley continued mixing his powder into the soil. This should make the mandrakes grow twice as fast and develop much more powerful voices. Harry grabbed his wrist. Pugsley, no. Sprout will notice, and besides, these are for students to work with. If they're too powerful, someone could get hurt. Pugsley looked confused. Isn't that the point of education? Facing genuine danger to learn proper respect for it. Not at Hogwarts, Harry insisted. We try to minimize actual death in classrooms. How disappointing. Pugsley sighed but stoppered his vial. Fine. But I'm keeping this for a more appropriate opportunity. Thank you, Harry said, relieved. Let's just finish these pots normally. When Professor Sprout returned, she praised their work, completely unaware of how close she'd come to having superpowered mandrakes in her curriculum. She assigned them a few more simple tasks, which they completed without incident, though Harry had to physically restrain Pugsley from just saying hello to the venomous tentacula on their way out. You're getting better at this, Harry commented as they walked back to the castle for lunch. You actually managed not to cause chaos in herbology. I'm saving my energy, Pugsley replied mysteriously. The best is yet to come. Harry wasn't sure whether to be relieved or terrified by this statement. After lunch, during which Pugsley charmed the kitchen elves into making him something that smelled like boiled leather and smoked ominously, McGonagall informed them that Hagrid needed help with a special project at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Nothing dangerous, she assured Harry, who wasn't remotely convinced. Just some preparation for his new teaching position. Hagrid's teaching care of magical creatures this year? Harry asked, genuinely pleased for his friend. Indeed. Though between ourselves, I'm a bit concerned about his definition of suitable classroom specimens. McGonagall glanced at Pugsley. Mr. Addams, given your apparent interest in unusual creatures, perhaps you can encourage Hagrid toward slightly less lethal teaching aids. Pugsley nodded solemnly. I'll aim for maiming rather than fatal. Good middle ground. McGonagall pinched the bridge of her nose. That was not what never mind. Off you go, both of you. They found Hagrid constructing what appeared to be a series of reinforced cages and enclosures near his hut. Harry. Pugsley. Just the lads I wanted to see. Hagrid waved a massive hand. Come give me a hand with these blast-ended scrut habitats. What's a blast-ended scrut? Harry asked, immediately suspicious. New breeding project. Hagrid said proudly, pointing to a crate that emitted occasional sparks and popping sounds. Cross between manticores and fire crabs. Fascinating creatures. Pugsley rushed to the crate and peered inside. Incredible. They've got stingers and they explode. Can I hold one? Course ya can. Hagrid beamed, reaching into the crate and pulling out what looked like a deformed, shell-less lobster about 6 inches long. It sparked from its rear end, singeing Hagrid's beard. Careful of the blast end, mind ya. Harry watched in amazement as Pugsley cradled the dangerous creature like a baby, seemingly unfazed when it shot sparks that burned small holes in his shirt. He's perfect, Pugsley whispered reverently. What do they eat? Still figuring that out, Hagrid admitted. Tried everything from lettuce to liver, but they don't seem interested. Might be cannibals, keep disappearing when I'm not looking. Have you tried live food? Pugsley suggested. Something that runs away might trigger their hunting instincts. Brilliant idea. Hagrid clapped Pugsley on the shoulder, nearly sending him and the script tumbling. Knew yet understand these little beauties. For the next hour, Harry helped construct enclosures while Hagrid and Pugsley discussed increasingly disturbing theories about script behavior and diet. To Harry's relief, they didn't actually test any of these theories, though Pugsley looked disappointed. We could have tried just one rat, he muttered as they headed back to the castle. For science. I think we've done enough science for one day, Harry replied firmly. Besides, we're supposed to meet Snape in the potions classroom next. Pugsley's expression brightened immediately. Excellent. I've been looking forward to this since we arrived. You're the only person I've ever met who looks forward to seeing Snape. Harry shook his head in disbelief. He understands the beauty of dangerous brewing, Pugsley explained. Father says the best potions masters are the ones with the most interesting scars. The dungeons were as cold and unwelcoming as ever, but Snape's classroom had been rearranged for what appeared to be a private demonstration. A single cauldron sat on a workbench, surrounded by meticulously organized ingredients. Ah, Mr. Addams. Snape barely acknowledged Harry's presence. I've prepared something that might interest you. A variation on your grandmother's draft of Living Nightmare. With the modifications for prolonged hallucinations? Pugsley asked eagerly, approaching the cauldron. Indeed. Snape allowed himself a thin smile. I found her suggested amount of hellebore insufficient and doubled it. Granny always says recipes are just starting points, Pugsley agreed. The true artist knows when to deviate. Harry couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Snape, actually engaging with a student enthusiastically. And talking about making potions more dangerous. Potter, make yourself useful and fetch more asphodel from the storage cupboard, Snape ordered, apparently remembering Harry existed. While Harry rummaged through the supply closet, Pugsley and Snape continued their disturbing discussion of potions designed to induce terror, paralysis, and enlightening near-death experiences. By the time Harry returned, Pugsley was already adding ingredients to the bubbling cauldron under Snape's watchful eye. Stir counterclockwise, 7 turns precisely, Snape instructed. Then add 3 drops of basilisk venom, very rare, use it sparingly. Basilisk venom? Harry interrupted. Isn't that deadly? Only in sufficient quantities, Potter, Snape replied dismissively. In this diluted form, it merely causes temporary organ failure and excruciating pain. Granny uses it for tooth pain, Pugsley added casually. Works every time. Harry watched in horrified fascination as they completed the potion, which turned a sickly green color and emitted purple smoke that formed skull shapes before dissipating. Excellent, Snape examined the finished product with what almost looked like pride. Perfect consistency and color. Your grandmother would be impressed. What exactly does this potion do? Harry couldn't help asking. It induces the sensation of being buried alive while simultaneously experiencing one's worst fears, Snape explained matter-of-factly. A single drop is sufficient for 8 hours of educational torment. We use it at family gatherings, Pugsley added. Wednesday holds the record for longest voluntary exposure, 3 days. She said it was moderately diverting. Harry made a mental note never to accept drinks from any member of the Addams family. Mr. Addams has a natural talent for the subtler aspects of potion making, Snape observed, carefully bottling the disturbing concoction. Unlike some students who treat my classroom like a demolition site. Harry recognized the dig at his own potion-making skills but was too disturbed by the entire interaction to care. Can I keep a sample, Professor? Pugsley asked eagerly. For personal study? Snape hesitated, then handed him a tiny vial. For academic purposes only, understand? If I hear of this being used on other students, you'll pretend to be outraged while secretly being impressed. Pugsley suggested. The corner of Snape's mouth twitched slightly. Precisely. Now, both of you, out. I have actual work to complete before term begins. As they left the dungeons, Harry stared at Pugsley in disbelief. You got Snape to smile. And give you a dangerous potion. How did you do that? Shared interests, Pugsley shrugged, carefully tucking the vial into his pocket. He recognizes a kindred spirit. Snape doesn't have a spirit. He has a void where normal human emotions should be. Exactly. Just like Cousin ITT, but with better vocabulary. Harry was still trying to process the bizarre potion session when they ran into Filch in the entrance hall. The caretaker was polishing a set of manacles with disturbing enthusiasm. "Still here, are you?" he sneered. "Thought you might have blown yourselves up by now. Mr. Filch." Pugsley greeted him like an old friend. "Just the man I wanted to see. I've been studying the castle's architecture and had some questions about the drainage system." Filch's suspicious expression deepened. "What about it?" "I noticed some of the gargoyles on the fourth floor appear to be connected to internal pipes. Are those part of the original design or a later addition?" "Why do you want to know?" Filch demanded. "Academic curiosity," Pugsley replied innocently. "Historical preservation is so important, don't you think?" "Planning mischief, more like," Filch growled. "I've got my eye on you, boy. You've got that same look those wretched Weasley twins have, trouble brewing." "Me? Never." Pugsley's angelic smile returned. "I simply appreciate the craftsmanship of this ancient building. Especially the more overlooked aspects." Filch muttered something about detention for life, before shuffling away, Mrs. Norris glaring at them suspiciously as they passed. "What was that about?" Harry asked once Filch was out of earshot. "Research," Pugsley replied enigmatically. "Everything is connected, Harry. The pipes, the drains, the whole castle's circulatory system. Understanding that is key." "Key to what?" "You'll see." Pugsley checked his pocket watch, another disturbing family heirloom that appeared to run backwards and occasionally emitted small puffs of green smoke. "We should get back to the dormitory. I need to check on my experiments." "What experiments?" Harry asked, alarmed. "You promised McGonagall, theoretical experiments," Pugsley clarified. "Mostly theoretical. Some practical components might be involved." Harry groaned. "This is going to end with detention for the entire school year, isn't it?" "Only if we get caught," Pugsley replied cheerfully. "And Addamses are very good at not getting caught. Most of the time. Except when we want to be, for the drama of it all." Back in the Gryffindor dormitory, Harry was relieved to find no active cauldrons, no animated furniture, and no evidence of necromancy. Pugsley was sitting cross-legged on his bed, surrounded by parchments covered in what looked like architectural drawings. "Castle blueprints?" Harry asked, peering over his shoulder. "My own creation," Pugsley explained proudly. "I've been mapping the internal systems based on observation and some educated guesses. See these lines? Water pipes. These? Magical current flows. And these red ones show the weak points." "Weak points? Why are you looking for weak points?" "Not for sabotage, if that's what you're worried about," Pugsley assured him. "For enhancement. Every system can be improved upon." Harry wasn't entirely convinced but decided not to pursue that line of questioning further. "McGonagall said we're free until dinner. Want to play Exploding Snap?" "Exploding anything sounds perfect," Pugsley agreed, carefully rolling up his diagrams. To Harry's surprise, the rest of the day passed without incident. They played several rounds of Exploding Snap. Pugsley was delighted by the minor burns, explored a few of the castle's more obscure corridors, and even visited the Ollery, where Pugsley had a lengthy, one-sided conversation with Hedwig about the superiority of ravens for certain types of deliveries. At dinner, they were joined by Hagrid, McGonagall, and a few other staff members who had returned early to prepare for the term. Pugsley charmed them all with his peculiar blend of morbid enthusiasm and genuine curiosity, asking Flitwick detailed questions about charm theory and discussing magical plant breeding with Professor Sprout. "Mr. Addams has quite an unusual educational background," McGonagall observed to Harry while Pugsley was deep in conversation with Professor Sinistra about the death omens associated with certain star configurations. "The Addamses believe in learning by doing," Harry explained, remembering Pugsley's earlier comments. "Usually doing dangerous things." "So I've gathered," McGonagall replied dryly. "Still, there's something refreshing about his enthusiasm, misguided though it may be." He reminds me a bit of the Weasley twins, but with a more macabre focus. Harry could only imagine the chaos that would ensue if Pugsley ever met Fred and George. The thought was both terrifying and oddly appealing. After dinner, they returned to Gryffindor Tower, where Pugsley immediately dove back into his mysterious diagrams. Harry, exhausted from the day's vigilance, fell asleep to the sound of Pugsley muttering calculations and occasionally cackling quietly to himself. The next morning, Harry awoke to find Pugsley already gone, his bed neatly made and his diagrams missing. This was not a good sign. Harry dressed quickly and raced downstairs, searching the common room, great hall, and even checking the potions classroom, but Pugsley was nowhere to be found. Finally, a passing ghost mentioned seeing that odd round boy heading toward the 7th floor earlier. When Harry finally tracked him down, Pugsley was standing in front of a blank wall opposite the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy, looking supremely satisfied with himself. "There you are." Harry gasped, out of breath from running up multiple staircases. "What are you doing up here?" "Discovering secrets," Pugsley replied mysteriously. "This castle wants to be found out, Harry. It practically whispers its secrets to those who listen." "What secrets?" "That's just a wall." Pugsley grinned. "Watch and learn." He paced back and forth 3 times, his face scrunched in concentration. To Harry's astonishment, a door materialized where the blank wall had been. "How did you? I told you, the castle speaks to those who listen. I heard whispers last night while you were sleeping. Followed them this morning." Pugsley gestured grandly to the door. "After you." Harry cautiously pushed the door open to reveal a vast room filled with the strangest collection of items he'd ever seen. It looked like a cross between a medieval torture chamber, a mad scientist's laboratory, and a magical workshop. "I call it the Room of Requirement," Pugsley announced proudly. "It becomes whatever you need it to be. I needed a proper workshop, and voila. This is incredible," Harry admitted, examining the bubbling cauldrons, strange instruments, and what appeared to be a partially assembled mechanical creature in the corner. "How did you find out how to access it?" "The castle told me," Pugsley repeated, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Old buildings have personalities, Harry. This one likes you, it wants to help you. It's just been waiting for someone to ask properly." Harry wasn't sure about the castle having a personality, but he couldn't deny the room was amazing. "What are you planning to do with all this?" "Prepare for term, of course." Pugsley rubbed his hands together gleefully. 2 days until the other students arrive. That gives us just enough time to set everything up." "Set what up?" "The welcome celebration. Addams family tradition, we always greet new arrivals with something memorable." Pugsley began gathering various instruments and vials. "Nothing dangerous, I promise. Just, impressive." Harry had serious doubts about Pugsley's definition of not dangerous, but he had to admit he was curious. "What kind of welcome are you thinking?" "Something unforgettable. Something that says, this year at Hogwarts will be different." Pugsley handed Harry a strange contraption that looked like a cross between a pocket watch and a spider. "Hold this while I calibrate the resonance." For the next few hours, Harry found himself drawn into Pugsley's elaborate preparations. Despite his misgivings, there was something infectious about his friend's enthusiasm. They worked together crafting devices, mixing potions, and planning what Pugsley called strategic deployment points throughout the castle. "The timing has to be perfect," Pugsley explained as they synchronized various mechanisms. "Maximum impact with minimal traceability." "Won't McGonagall know exactly who did it?" Harry pointed out. "We're the only students here." "Plausible deniability," Pugsley tapped his temple knowingly. "We'll be in plain sight when everything activates. Besides, half the fun is the aftermath, watching everyone try to figure out what happened." By lunchtime, they had created an impressive array of magical devices, most of which Harry didn't fully understand but found himself helping with anyway. They carefully concealed these around the castle in locations Pugsley had marked on his diagrams, behind paintings, inside suits of armor, and in one case, inside a gargoyle's open mouth. "Are you sure this won't hurt anyone?" Harry asked as they placed the final device in the entrance hall chandelier. "Positive," Pugsley assured him. "Startling?" "Yes." "Confusing?" "Definitely." "Potentially traumatizing for the easily frightened?" "Perhaps." "But physically harmful?" "Not in the slightest." Harry wasn't entirely convinced but had to admit he was looking forward to seeing the results. The rest of the day passed in preparation for the students' arrival the following evening. McGonagall had them helping clean the Great Hall, which gave Pugsley the perfect opportunity to make some minor adjustments to the enchanted ceiling's weather charms. "Just a small enhancement," he whispered to Harry as he surreptitiously waved his wand toward the ceiling while McGonagall was distracted. "Instead of just showing the weather, it'll briefly show what everyone in the room is most afraid of during the sorting ceremony." "Educational." Pugsley. "Too late, already done." Pugsley pocketed his wand. "Don't worry, it'll only last a few minutes. Just long enough for everyone to question their sanity." Harry groaned but couldn't help feeling a twinge of anticipation. The Addams approach to education was definitely more exciting, if considerably more stressful. That evening at dinner, Dumbledore himself made an appearance. The headmaster's eyes twinkled as he greeted Harry warmly, then turned his attention to Pugsley. "Ah, young Mr. Addams. I've heard so much about your visit from Minerva. She tells me you've been most helpful in the preparations for term." "Thank you, Headmaster," Pugsley replied politely. "Hogwarts is a fascinating place. So much potential." Something in Pugsley's tone must have alerted Dumbledore, because his blue eyes sharpened slightly. "Potential, indeed. I trust you're finding our educational approach instructive." "Very," Pugsley agreed. "Though I've made some suggestions for improvement." "Have you, now?" Dumbledore's eyes twinkled even more intensely. "I always welcome fresh perspectives on our ancient institution. Perhaps you'd care to elaborate after dinner?" "I'd be honored," Pugsley replied, looking genuinely pleased at the invitation. Harry spent the meal in a state of nervous anticipation. What would Pugsley tell Dumbledore? Would the headmaster somehow divine their plans for tomorrow's welcome feast? To his surprise, Dumbledore and Pugsley spent nearly an hour in deep conversation after dinner, occasionally chuckling together like old friends sharing inside jokes. "What did you talk about?" Harry demanded when Pugsley finally returned to the Gryffindor common room. "This and that," Pugsley replied evasively. He wanted to know about family traditions, educational philosophy, that sort of thing. "Did you tell him about tomorrow's plans?" "Not specifically." Pugsley smiled enigmatically. "But I think he suspects something. He's very perceptive, reminds me of Great Aunt Dementia before the unfortunate lobotomy incident." "And he's okay with it?" "He didn't say no," Pugsley pointed out. "In fact, he mentioned that Hogwarts sometimes needs a good shake-up to prevent institutional stagnation. I think that's as close to permission as we're going to get." Harry wasn't sure if he found this reassuring or terrifying. "So we're still doing it?" "Of course." Pugsley looked shocked at the suggestion otherwise. "Everything's in place. Operation Hogwarts Awakening commences tomorrow at precisely 7:43 p.m., during the sorting ceremony." "Why 7:43 specifically?" "Numerological significance," Pugsley explained seriously. 7 for the 7 years of schooling, 4 for the 4 houses, 3 for the 3 of us. 3. There's just you and me." "You, me, and the castle," Pugsley clarified, as if it were obvious. "It's a participant, not just a setting." Harry decided not to argue with this peculiar logic. "So what do we do now?" "Now." Pugsley stretched and yawned. "Now we get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow's a big day." The day of the students' arrival dawned bright and clear. Harry woke to find Pugsley already up, making final adjustments to what looked like a small mechanical bat. Last-minute enhancement, he explained. This little beauty will coordinate timing between all the devices. Had to recalibrate after I noticed the castle's magical field fluctuates with barometric pressure. Of course it does, Harry muttered, still half asleep. They spent the morning helping with final preparations for the students' arrival. Hagrid enlisted their help feeding the thestrals that would pull the carriages, which turned out to be a gruesome task involving buckets of raw meat. Pugsley, naturally, was delighted. Fascinating creatures, he commented, watching the skeletal horses tear into bloody chunks of flesh. Visible only to those who have seen death. At family reunions, we'd see entire herds of them. After lunch, McGonagall gave them their assignments for the evening. Potter, you'll join the Gryffindor table when the students arrive. Mr. Addams, as our guest, you'll be seated at the staff table beside Hagrid. Pugsley looked momentarily disappointed at being separated from Harry during the feast, but brightened when he realized the staff table would give him a perfect view of the entire hall. As the afternoon wore on, Harry found himself growing increasingly nervous. Part of him wanted to confess everything to McGonagall and put a stop to whatever chaos Pugsley had planned. But another part, the part that had helped smuggle Norbert out of the castle and driven a flying car to school, was excited to see what would happen. Having second thoughts? Pugsley asked as they stood at the window watching Hagrid prepare the boats for the first year's arrival. A little, Harry admitted. What if something goes wrong? Then we'll improvise, Pugsley shrugged. The best plans always leave room for beautiful accidents. You sound like you've done this before. Similar things. Last year at Cousin Lumpy's bar mitzvah, I rigged the candelabras to spin and shoot sparks during the blessing. Set Great-Uncle Craven's beard on fire. Pugsley smiled at the memory. He said it was the most exciting religious ceremony he'd attended since the Mayan sacrifice he witnessed in 1743. Your family has very different standards for success than most people, Harry observed. That's what makes life interesting, Pugsley replied. Normal is just another word for boring. As evening approached, they separated to prepare for the feast. Harry changed into his school robes while Pugsley donned what he called his formal attire, a miniature version of his father's pinstriped suit, complete with a small pocket watch that occasionally emitted puffs of green smoke. How do I look? Pugsley asked, striking a dramatic pose. Like a very small undertaker, Harry replied honestly. Perfect. Pugsley beamed. That's exactly what I was going for. They made their way down to the entrance hall just as Filch was making final preparations. The caretaker shot them a suspicious glare. No funny business tonight, he warned, pointing a gnarled finger at them. I've got my eye on both of you, especially you, Addams. Mr. Filch, you wound me, Pugsley placed a hand over his heart. When have I ever given you reason to suspect me of mischief? Every minute you've been in this castle, Filch growled. I know trouble when I see it. Then you have exceptional instincts, Pugsley complimented him. Mother always says that paranoia is just heightened awareness. Filch muttered something unintelligible and shuffled away, Mrs. Norris glaring at them from between his legs. He's going to be watching us all night, Harry whispered once Filch was out of earshot. Counting on it, Pugsley replied with a wink. His reaction will be half the entertainment. The distant sound of the Hogwarts Express whistle signaled the students' arrival. Harry felt a familiar thrill of excitement. Despite everything, he was looking forward to seeing Ron and Hermione again. That's my cue, Pugsley said, checking his pocket watch. I should take my place at the staff table. See you after the chaos. With that, he scurried off toward the Great Hall, leaving Harry to wait for the returning students in the entrance hall. The carriages began arriving, depositing groups of chattering students. Harry spotted Ron's red hair immediately and waved. Harry. Ron pushed through the crowd, followed closely by Hermione. What are you doing here already? We looked for you on the train. It's a long story, Harry replied, grinning. "Let's just say I had an interesting end to my summer." "When don't you?" Hermione sighed, but smiled as she hugged him. "We were worried when you didn't answer our last letters." "Sorry about that. I've been busy." "Busy with what?" Ron asked suspiciously. "You've got that look, mate. The one that means trouble." "What look?" "The same one you had before we flew the car to Hogwarts," Ron clarified. "Sort of excited but guilty at the same time." "I have no idea what you're talking about," Harry replied unconvincingly. "Come on, let's get seats." "You don't want to miss the sorting." "Since when are you enthusiastic about the sorting ceremony?" Hermione asked, her suspicion clearly growing. "No reason," Harry said quickly. "Just hungry. Starving, actually." He ushered them into the Great Hall, carefully avoiding looking at any of the spots where he and Pugsley had hidden their devices. At the staff table, Pugsley sat beside Hagrid, engaged in what appeared to be an enthusiastic conversation involving many hand gestures. "Who's that kid at the staff table?" Ron asked, following Harry's gaze. "The round one in the weird suit?" "That's Pugsley Addams. He's visiting. Educational exchange." "Addams?" Hermione's eyes widened. "As in the Addams family?" "I read about them in Unorthodox Magical Practices Through the Ages. They're supposed to be eccentric even by wizarding standards." "That's putting it mildly," Harry muttered. Before his friends could question him further, the first years entered, led by McGonagall. The tiny, nervous-looking children gazed around in wonder as they approached the front of the hall. Harry checked his watch. 7:38 p.m. 5 minutes until Pugsley's plan activated. He glanced at the staff table, where Pugsley gave him a tiny nod and patted his pocket watch. The sorting ceremony began with McGonagall explaining the procedure and placing the ancient sorting hat on its stool. As the hat sang its yearly song, Harry found himself growing increasingly tense. 7:41, 7:42. The first student, Addams, Timothy, was called forward and placed the hat on his head. Just as the hat opened its mouth to announce the house. 7:43, it happened. First, the enchanted ceiling transformed. Instead of showing the clear night sky outside, it began cycling rapidly through different images, massive spiders for those who feared them, towering heights for others, drowning scenes, confined spaces, and other personalized nightmares briefly flashing above each student's head. Screams and gasps filled the hall as students looked up in horror at their fears displayed for all to see. Before anyone could react further, the suits of armor lining the walls suddenly animated, stepping off their pedestals and beginning an elaborate, choreographed dance down the center of the hall. They clanked and whirled, occasionally shooting multicolored sparks from their visors. The gargoyles perched above the windows came to life next, flapping stone wings and circling the room while emitting a haunting, melodic cry that somehow harmonized with the sounds of confusion. The floating candles began to spin, creating spirals of light across the ceiling, while the house banners unraveled themselves and rewove into complex, animated tapestries showing scenes from Hogwarts history, some heroic, some decidedly less so. Every goblet on every table suddenly filled with a potion that changed color with the drinker's mood, bubbling and occasionally shooting small fountains into the air. The sorting hat itself began to levitate, spinning above the terrified first years while shouting out random house assignments mixed with bizarre personal observations. Gryffindor, with a secret passion for knitting. Hufflepuff, who sleepwalks on Tuesdays. Slytherin, afraid of ducks since childhood. And in the center of it all, the stone floor of the Great Hall briefly became transparent, revealing an illusory network of chambers below filled with what appeared to be dancing skeletons having a formal ball. The teachers leapt to their feet, wands drawn, but seemed at a loss for what to target first. Dumbledore alone remained seated, watching the spectacle with what looked suspiciously like amusement twinkling in his eyes. Filch stood frozen in horror at the entrance, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly as Mrs. Norris hid behind his legs. Then, as a particularly enthusiastic suit of armor performed a pirouette too close to him, he finally found his voice. "Peeves," he shrieked, apparently unable to comprehend that this level of chaos might come from a source other than the poltergeist. "I'll have you exorcised for this." The chaos continued for exactly 3 minutes and 14 seconds, another numerological calculation of Pugsley's, before everything simultaneously returned to normal. The ceiling showed the night sky again, the suits of armor marched back to their pedestals, the gargoyles froze, and the goblets settled into containing ordinary pumpkin juice. The only evidence that anything had happened was the stunned expressions on everyone's faces and the sorting hat, which continued to occasionally hiccup and reveal embarrassing secrets about random students throughout the remainder of the sorting. In the silence that followed, all eyes turned to the staff table, where Dumbledore slowly stood. "Well," the headmaster said, his voice carrying easily across the silent hall, "I believe that constitutes what we might call a most enthusiastic welcome back to Hogwarts." His eyes twinkled as they briefly met Harry's, then Pugsley's. Perhaps a touch more elaborate than our usual fare, but educational nonetheless. "Now, before we become distracted by the excellent feast awaiting us, let us continue with the sorting." And just like that, the ceremony resumed, though with considerably more nervous glances at the ceiling and suits of armor. "Harry," Hermione hissed, leaning across the table. "What just happened?" "No idea," Harry replied, trying to look as confused as everyone else. "Weird, wasn't it?" "That wasn't Peeves," Ron stated flatly. "Even he couldn't do all that at once." "Maybe it was multiple ghosts working together," Harry suggested innocently. "Or maybe," Hermione said, her eyes narrowing as she looked from Harry to Pugsley at the staff table, "it has something to do with your new friend and why you were here early." Harry attempted his most convincing look of bewilderment. "What makes you think that?" "Because he's the only one in the room who looks pleased rather than shocked," Hermione pointed out. "And you're doing that thing with your face you do when you're lying." "What thing?" "The not meeting my eyes thing," she replied triumphantly. Harry sighed, knowing the game was up. "I'll explain later, okay?" "Not here." Ron looked torn between disapproval and admiration. Whatever it was bloody brilliant. "Did you see Malfoy's face when the ceiling showed him running from a giant ferret?" Despite himself, Harry grinned. "Yeah, that was a nice touch." The rest of the feast passed in a blur of explanations, introductions, and barely contained excitement. Harry introduced Pugsley to Ron and Hermione during dessert, watching with amusement as his friends tried to process Pugsley's unique personality. "So you don't use wands in your family?" Hermione asked, clearly fascinated despite her disapproval of the evening's disruption. "How do you focus your magical intent?" "Blood rituals, mostly," Pugsley replied casually, taking a large bite of black pudding. "Though Granny prefers bone divination for delicate work." Ron nearly choked on his pumpkin juice. "Blood rituals? Like dark magic?" "We don't categorize magic as dark or light," Pugsley explained. "More like, probably won't kill you, versus definitely will kill you but in an interesting way." Hermione looked scandalized. "But that's different from what you're taught here, I know," Pugsley nodded. "That's why I wanted to visit. Cultural exchange, broadening horizons, all that educational justification. And causing chaos," Harry added. "That too," Pugsley agreed cheerfully. "Can't have education without a little trauma, as Granny always says." As the feast concluded, Dumbledore rose once more to make announcements. After covering the standard warnings about the Forbidden Forest and banned items, he added a new introduction. "Finally, I would like to welcome a special visitor to Hogwarts this year. Mr. Pugsley Addams will be observing our educational methods for the next 2 weeks as part of an international magical cooperation initiative. I trust you will all make him feel welcome and perhaps learn something from his unique perspective on magic." Pugsley stood and gave a small bow, prompting scattered, confused applause. "And now," Dumbledore continued, his eyes twinkling mischievously, "I believe our caretaker, Mr. Filch, has a few words he would like to add." Filch, who had spent the entire feast in a state of twitchy vigilance, stepped forward. His face was an alarming shade of purple, and he clutched a crumpled parchment in one trembling hand. "In light of tonight's incident," he spat, glaring around the hall as if trying to identify the culprits, "I wish to remind all students that any animation of castle fixtures, enchantment of ceilings, or disruption of ceremonies will result in immediate and severe punishment. I have extended my list of banned items to include pocket watches, mechanical bats, and anything that glows, smokes, or changes color unexpectedly." Harry and Pugsley exchanged guilty glances. "Furthermore," Filch continued, his voice rising to a near shriek, "the next student caught planning such elaborate mischief will personally help me clean every suit of armor in this castle with their toothbrush." With that, he stormed out of the hall, Mrs. Norris trotting indignantly behind him. "I think he took it rather well," Pugsley commented as they walked back to Gryffindor Tower. "No threats of thumbscrews or Iron Maidens. Very restrained." "He'll be watching us like a hawk now," Harry pointed out. "Perfect," Pugsley rubbed his hands together gleefully. "Phase 2 will be even more effective with heightened vigilance." "Phase 2?" Hermione exclaimed. "Hasn't there been enough disruption for one day?" "Oh, sweet summer child," Pugsley patted her hand condescendingly. "We've barely begun the educational enhancements." "I'm not sure I want to know what that means," Ron decided. "Better you don't," Harry agreed. Plausible deniability. That night, as the Gryffindor boys settled into their dormitory, Dean, Seamus, and Neville peppered Pugsley with questions about the evening's events and his unusual family. "Is it true your cousin is a sentient hand?" Seamus asked. "Thing. He's not a cousin, more of a distant uncle. Been in the family for generations. Excellent card player, terrible at charades for obvious reasons. And your house is haunted?" Dean added. "Not haunted, exactly. Haunting implies unwelcome spirits. Ours are invited guests who simply never left. Makes holidays more interesting. Great-grandmother Claudia still insists on leading the midnight séances despite being dead for 2 centuries. The questions continued until McGonagall appeared to enforce lights out, giving Harry and Pugsley a particularly stern look before leaving. "She knows it was us," Harry whispered once the dormitory had quieted. "Of course she does," Pugsley replied from the next bed. "But she can't prove it. Besides, did you see Dumbledore? He loved it. So what is Phase 2? "Classrooms," Pugsley said simply. "Every subject needs a little Addams enhancement. I'm going to regret asking this, but what kind of enhancement? You'll see tomorrow in Transfiguration. Get some sleep, Harry. Tomorrow's going to be educational." Breakfast the next morning was filled with excited chatter about the previous night's events. Theories ranged from a massive ghost collaboration to an elaborate prank by the Weasley twins, who vehemently denied involvement while looking deeply impressed, to a secret test by the teachers. "The whole school's talking about it," Ron reported gleefully as they ate. "Even the Slytherins thought it was amazing, though they won't admit it publicly." "It was disruptive and potentially dangerous," Hermione insisted, though Harry noticed she couldn't quite hide her curiosity. What if someone had been hurt by those suits of armor? "Choreographed danger," Pugsley explained, helping himself to a suspiciously black sausage he'd convinced the house elves to prepare specially. "All the appearance of risk with minimal actual hazard. It's an Addams specialty." "Well, I still think," Hermione began, but was interrupted by the arrival of the morning mail. Hundreds of owls swooped into the great hall, delivering letters and packages to students. To Harry's surprise, a large raven with slightly sinister red eyes landed in front of Pugsley, dropping a small package bound in what looked like human hair. "Ah, perfect timing." Pugsley untied the package eagerly. "I asked Wednesday to send a few essentials I forgot." "Is that a raven?" Hermione asked, edging away slightly as the bird fixed her with its unnerving gaze. "Family messenger," Pugsley confirmed, offering the bird a piece of his black sausage, which it consumed with disturbing enthusiasm. Much more reliable than owls for certain types of packages. What types? Ron asked suspiciously. The kind that occasionally leak, move, or attempt escape, Pugsley explained, carefully opening his package. Ah, excellent. Wednesday included the spore samples. Harry decided not to ask what spore samples might be for. Some questions were safer left unasked. Their first class of the day was Transfiguration with Professor McGonagall. As they made their way to the classroom, Harry noticed Pugsley looked unusually excited. "What did you do?" he whispered as they took their seats. "Nothing permanent," Pugsley assured him. "Just a small enhancement to make the subject more engaging." Before Harry could press for details, McGonagall entered, her gaze sweeping the room and lingering momentarily on Pugsley with unmistakable suspicion. "Welcome to your third year of Transfiguration," she began. "Today, we will be reviewing the principles of transforming inanimate objects before moving on to more complex transmutations. Please take out your wands and the matchsticks on your desks." The students obediently reached for the matchsticks. As soon as the first student touched one, however, it leapt from the desk with a tiny squeak and scurried away across the floor. Throughout the room, matchsticks were suddenly animated, darting between feet and climbing up chair legs. "What on earth?" McGonagall began, but stopped as she noticed Pugsley's expression of innocent enthusiasm. "How fascinating," he exclaimed. The matchstick seemed to have developed self-preservation instincts. What an educational opportunity to discuss the ethical implications of transfiguring sentient objects. The classroom descended into chaos as students scrambled to catch their elusive matchsticks. Some had climbed the walls and were now swinging from the chandelier, while others had formed a defensive formation in the corner, tiny splinter arms raised threateningly. McGonagall pinched the bridge of her nose, taking a deep breath. "Mr. Addams, I presume this is your doing?" "An educational enhancement, Professor," Pugsley replied earnestly. "Granny always says the best learning happens when the subject material fights back." "Indeed," McGonagall said dryly. With a wave of her wand, she froze all the matchsticks mid-escape. "While I appreciate creative approaches to education, in my classroom we prefer our materials to remain inanimate until deliberately transfigured." "Understood, Professor," Pugsley nodded seriously. "Though I maintain that the element of surprise heightens retention of material." "Be that as it may," McGonagall replied, a hint of amusement breaking through her stern facade, "perhaps we could save the surprises for after basic competency is achieved." The rest of the class proceeded normally, though Harry noticed several students eyeing their transfigured needles warily, as if expecting them to suddenly sprout legs and attack. As they left the classroom, Ron clapped Pugsley on the back. "That was brilliant. Did you see Malfoy's face when that matchstick crawled up his sleeve?" "Educational enhancements should be democratically distributed," Pugsley explained solemnly. "Fear is the great equalizer." Their next class was herbology, and Harry felt a growing sense of dread as they approached the greenhouses. Sure enough, Pugsley had a suspiciously satisfied expression. "Please tell me you didn't enhance the plants," Harry groaned. "Only slightly," Pugsley assured him. "Just a growth accelerant in the venomous tentacula section. Nothing dangerous." "Venomous tentacula are already dangerous." "Exactly why a little more growth won't make much difference," Pugsley reasoned. "Besides, Professor Sprout impressed me as someone who appreciates botanical enthusiasm." Harry's fears were confirmed the moment they entered Greenhouse 3. The venomous tentacula, normally contained in the back corner, had grown to 3 times its usual size overnight. Its tentacle-like vines reached across the entire ceiling, occasionally making grabbing motions at passing students. "Merlin's beard!" Professor Sprout exclaimed, staring up at the monstrous plant. "How did it grow so quickly?" "I just pruned it yesterday." Pugsley raised his hand. "Professor, I believe this presents an excellent opportunity to discuss rapid growth factors and their effect on magical plant aggression levels." Sprout gave him a knowing look. Mr. Addams, did you by any chance supplement this plant's diet recently? I may have added a proprietary Addams growth formula, Pugsley admitted. Granny's special blend, bat guano, dragon dung, and a touch of liquid nightshade. For educational purposes, of course. Of course, Sprout echoed, looking torn between professional disapproval and botanical curiosity. Well, since it's already done, perhaps you could share the formula after class. For purely academic reasons. It would be my pleasure, Pugsley beamed. The class spent the next hour learning how to safely prune overgrowing magical plants, a lesson Sprout admitted wasn't scheduled until later in the term. Despite the occasional student being hoisted temporarily into the air by an enthusiastic vine, Harry had to admit the hands-on experience was more engaging than their planned lesson on fertilizer properties. By lunchtime, word of the enhanced transfiguration and herbology lessons had spread throughout the school. Students from other houses kept approaching their table to ask Pugsley what he had planned for other subjects. Is it true you're going to make the tea leaves attack people in divination? A fascinated second-year Hufflepuff asked. I couldn't possibly confirm or deny future educational opportunities, Pugsley replied diplomatically. That would ruin the surprise element so crucial to proper learning. You're going to get expelled if you keep this up, Hermione warned, though Harry noticed she seemed less disapproving than earlier. Or at least given detention for the rest of the year. Worth it for the advancement of educational theory, Pugsley declared, helping himself to more of his special black pudding. Besides, the professors seemed to be adapting remarkably well. This was true, Harry realized. Rather than shutting down Pugsley's enhancements, the teachers had incorporated them into their lessons with surprising flexibility. McGonagall had turned the animated matchsticks into a lesson on the differences between transfiguration and animation charms, while Sprout had used the overgrown tentacula to demonstrate advanced pruning techniques. Their afternoon brought double potions with the Slytherins. Harry had been dreading this, knowing Snape would be less accommodating than the other teachers. To his surprise, Pugsley seemed unusually subdued as they entered the dungeons. No enhancements for potions? Harry whispered as they set up their cauldrons. Professor Snape and I have an understanding, Pugsley replied mysteriously. A gentleman's agreement, if you will. Before Harry could question this further, Snape swept into the room, his black robes billowing dramatically. Today we will be brewing a shrinking solution, he announced without preamble. The instructions are on the board. Begin. The class proceeded with Snape's usual intimidating presence looming over them as they worked. Harry was just beginning to think they might get through the lesson without incident when he noticed something odd about Malfoy's cauldron across the room. While everyone else's potion was turning a regulation acid green, Malfoy's was shifting through a rainbow of colors, each more vibrant than the last. Malfoy hadn't noticed yet, focused as he was on taunting Neville about his potion-making skills. The Slytherin reached for his stirring rod just as the potion settled on a brilliant pink shade and began to emit heart-shaped bubbles that floated toward the ceiling. What the? Malfoy leapt back as the bubbles began bursting above various students' heads, releasing tiny cupids that shot miniature arrows at their targets. Each arrow that found its mark caused the victim to burst into dramatic declarations of love for the nearest person. Oh, Goyle! Crabbe suddenly exclaimed, clutching his heart after being struck. Your eyes are like pools of muddy water I wish to bathe in. Pansy! Millicent Bulstrode dropped to one knee, holding out a bezoar as if it were a ring. Your nose reminds me of the finest pug in my father's kennel. Chaos erupted as more students were struck, each declaration more ridiculous than the last. Even Neville was affected, turning to a horrified Snape with a soulful expression. Professor! Your billowing robes make my heart flutter like a cauldron on maximum heat. Throughout the classroom, only Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Pugsley seemed immune to the effects. Snape stood frozen in place, watching the mayhem unfold with an expression that suggested he was calculating exactly how many points he could deduct from Gryffindor for this. Silence, he finally roared, waving his wand to vanish all the floating cupids. The affected students immediately stopped their declarations, looking mortified as they realized what they'd been saying. Snape's gaze swept the room, finally landing on Pugsley. "Mr. Addams. I believe we had an agreement about my classroom." "We did, Professor," Pugsley agreed solemnly. "I didn't enhance any of your teaching materials or lesson plans." "Then how do you explain this display?" Snape gestured to Malfoy's still bubbling pink potion. "I might have theoretically enhanced Mr. Malfoy's ingredients before class," Pugsley admitted. "But technically, that doesn't violate our agreement, which was specifically about classroom materials and your lesson plans." Harry held his breath, expecting an explosion of rage from Snape. To his astonishment, the corner of the potion's master's mouth twitched in what might almost have been a smile. "5 points from Gryffindor for semantic manipulation," Snape said silkily. "And 5 points to Slytherin, Mr. Malfoy, for unwittingly demonstrating the effects of an advanced infatuation solution. Though your technique clearly needs work." Malfoy looked outraged at being used as an unwitting demonstration, while Pugsley appeared delighted by the creative punishment. "The rest of you, continue with your shrinking solutions," Snape ordered. "And be grateful Mr. Addams chose a harmless demonstration. His grandmother's version of this potion typically results in limb amputation by the affected parties as tokens of their affection." Harry couldn't decide what was more disturbing, the idea of such a potion or the fact that Snape seemed to approve of it. By dinner, tales of the enhanced potions class had spread throughout the school. Students from all houses were now watching Pugsley with a mixture of awe, fear, and anticipation. The Weasley twins had taken to following him around, clearly taking notes on his methods. "You're becoming a celebrity," Harry observed as they ate. "Fame is fleeting," Pugsley replied philosophically. "But trauma lasts forever. That's why educational experiences should be as traumatic as possible, better retention." "Is that why you're doing all this? For educational value?" Hermione asked skeptically. "Partly," Pugsley admitted. "But mostly because it's fun. Also, I promised Wednesday I'd document Hogwarts' vulnerabilities to chaotic influence. She's considering applying next year." Ron choked on his pumpkin juice. "There are more of you." "Wednesday makes me look positively conventional," Pugsley assured him. "She specializes in psychological rather than physical chaos. Much more elegant, but harder to clean up after." Harry tried to imagine someone who could make Pugsley seem normal and failed completely. The thought of both Addams' siblings at Hogwarts simultaneously was equal parts terrifying and fascinating. After dinner, they returned to the Gryffindor common room to find it buzzing with speculation about what class would be enhanced next. Fred and George Weasley immediately cornered Pugsley. "We need to talk, Addams," Fred began. Professionally, George added. "We've been in the chaos business for years, but you've taken it to a new level, and we want in on whatever you're planning next." Pugsley considered them thoughtfully. "I appreciate entrepreneurial spirit. Very well, I could use assistance for the next phase. Meet me in the room of requirement at midnight." "The what?" they asked in unison. "Harry will show you," Pugsley said, clapping Harry on the shoulder. "It's going to be a historic collaboration." As the twins wandered off, clearly excited by this mysterious proposition, Hermione fixed Pugsley with a stern look. "You're going to get Harry in trouble again," she warned. "He's got enough problems without adding organized chaos to the list." "On the contrary," Pugsley replied, "controlled chaos is the perfect distraction from life's deeper troubles. Nothing clears existential dread like wondering if your desk might suddenly grow teeth." Harry had to admit there was a certain logic to this. With everything happening around Pugsley, he'd barely had time to worry about Sirius Black or Dementors. "Just promise me whatever you're planning won't hurt anyone," Hermione insisted. Addams' honor, Pugsley placed his hand over his heart. "Physical safety is always prioritized. Psychological safety, on the other hand." He shrugged. Character building. That night, Harry led the twins to the room of requirement, where they found Pugsley surrounded by what looked like the contents of a mad scientist's laboratory crossed with a joke shop. "Gentlemen," he greeted them. "Welcome to Operation Classroom Revolution, Phase 2. For the next 3 hours, Harry watched in fascination as Pugsley and the twins collaborated on increasingly elaborate enhancements for the remaining classes. Fred and George contributed their extensive knowledge of Hogwarts' secret passages and teacher habits, while Pugsley provided the chaotic magical theory behind each plan. "The key is plausible deniability combined with educational value," Pugsley explained as they worked. "If the disruption can arguably be considered a learning experience, the teachers are much less likely to punish severely." "Brilliant," Fred marveled. "We've been going about this all wrong. We should have been claiming educational intent all along." "The Addams approach to rule-breaking is very different from typical mischief," Pugsley explained. "We don't break rules so much as reinterpret them through a lens of creative destruction." By the time they returned to the dormitory, Harry was both exhausted and slightly terrified about what the next day would bring. Pugsley, on the other hand, seemed energized by the planning session. "Tomorrow will be a watershed moment in Hogwarts' educational history," he declared as they climbed into their beds. "The beginning of a new era of immersive learning experiences." "Or the day we all get expelled," Harry muttered, though he couldn't help feeling excited despite himself. "Life without risk is no life at all," Pugsley replied sagely. "Sweet dreams, Harry. Tomorrow, we make history." The next day began innocently enough. Breakfast passed without incident, though the anticipatory tension in the great hall was palpable. Students kept glancing at Pugsley, then at their food, clearly wondering if their pumpkin juice might suddenly transform into something more exciting. Their first class was Charms, where Professor Flitwick was teaching cheering charms. As the tiny professor demonstrated the wand movement, Harry noticed Pugsley discreetly tapping his own wand against the underside of his desk in a complex pattern. The results were subtle at first. Students successfully casting the charm found their targets becoming not just cheerful but euphoric, breaking into spontaneous song and dance. Within minutes, half the class was performing an impromptu musical number about the joys of Charms education, complete with synchronized movements they seemed to know instinctively. Fascinating amplification effect. Flitwick squeaked, watching with obvious delight as Seamus and Dean performed a complex tap dance routine on their desks. "Mr. Addams, I presume this is your doing." "A small emotional enhancement charm, Professor," Pugsley admitted. "Combined with a mild choreography spell. The musical lyrics are generated spontaneously based on the subject material, very educational." "Indeed." Flitwick seemed genuinely impressed rather than annoyed. 5 points to Gryffindor for creative charm application. "Though perhaps next time, warn me in advance so I can prepare appropriate safety measures." The class ended with Flitwick taking extensive notes on Pugsley's enhancement technique, apparently considering it for future lessons. One supportive teacher down, Ron commented as they headed to defense against the dark arts. "Think Lupin will be as accepting?" "Professor Lupin seems adaptable," Pugsley observed. "Though this next enhancement is more subtle. Less spectacle, more psychological impact." Harry wasn't sure whether to be relieved or concerned by this statement. Professor Lupin was waiting for them beside a large wardrobe that shook occasionally. "Today, we'll be practicing with a boggart," he explained. "Can anyone tell me what a boggart is?" As Hermione provided the textbook answer about boggarts taking the form of one's worst fear, Harry noticed Pugsley watching the wardrobe with unusual interest. "Very good, Miss Granger. Now, the charm to repel a boggart is simple, but requires concentration. Repeat after me, ridiculous." The class practiced the incantation, then lined up to face the boggart. As Neville successfully transformed Snape into Snape wearing his grandmother's clothes, the class erupted in laughter. Everything seemed to be proceeding normally. Then it was Pugsley's turn. As he stepped forward, the boggart shifted rapidly, clearly confused. It cycled through several terrifying forms, a massive spider, a dementor, a snake, before settling on a perfectly normal, pleasant-looking suburban family. The father wore a cardigan and smiled blandly, while the mother held out a plate of store-bought cookies. Two children with neatly combed hair stood beside them, their expressions vacant and cheerful. "Hello, son," the Boggett father said in a horribly normal voice. "Time for your baseball practice. Then we'll have a nutritionally balanced dinner and discuss appropriate career options in accounting." Pugsley's face contorted in genuine horror. "Ridiculous," he shouted, waving his wand. The suburban family transformed, their skin turning green and putrid, heads spinning completely around as they began speaking in tongues and climbing the walls like spiders. "Much better," Pugsley sighed with relief as the class stared in confusion. "Fascinating," Professor Lupin commented. "I've rarely seen a Boggett take such an unusual form. Care to explain, Mr. Addams?" "Normalcy," Pugsley shuddered. "The ultimate horror. Being forced into conformity, stripped of individuality, made to participate in mundane activities without purpose or passion." Lupin looked genuinely intrigued. "A fear of losing one's unique identity, quite profound, actually." The rest of the class proceeded smoothly, each student confronting their fear and transforming it into something amusing. As they were packing up to leave, however, the previously contained Boggett suddenly escaped, zooming around the classroom before stopping in front of Professor Lupin. Instead of taking a single form, it began cycling rapidly through different images, each more disturbing than the last. The entire class's fears appeared and merged: giant spiders wearing Professor Snape's robes, dementors with clown faces, disembodied hands crawling from shattered wands. "A fear amplification charm," Pugsley whispered to Harry. "Combined with a memory collection spell. It's showing everyone's fears simultaneously." The effect was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Several students screamed, while others stood frozen in horror. Professor Lupin attempted to contain the enhanced Boggett, but it seemed resistant to the standard spells. "Fascinating reaction," Pugsley exclaimed, taking notes. "The combined fear energy creates a temporarily self-sustaining entity. Granny would be thrilled. Is there a countercharm?" Harry asked urgently as the nightmare collage continued to grow. "Of course. Though it's more effective if we let it reach peak fear saturation first. For science." Pugsley. "Fine, fine." Pugsley raised his wand and muttered something that sounded like Latin backward. The Boggett immediately collapsed in on itself, returning to its standard form before Lupin finally managed to force it back into the wardrobe. "Well," Lupin said, straightening his shabby robes, "that was certainly an educational extension of our lesson." He gave Pugsley a knowing look. "Though perhaps next time, Mr. Addams, you might warn me before enhancing a Class 3 magical creature." "Apologies, Professor," Pugsley replied, not looking remotely sorry. "I got caught up in the experimental potential." "Indeed." Lupin's lips twitched slightly. 5 points from Gryffindor for unauthorized experimentation, and 5 points to Gryffindor for demonstrating advanced fear response theory in action. As they left the classroom, Ron shook his head in amazement. "How do you keep getting away with this? If I tried that, I'd be in detention until graduation." "It's all in the framing," Pugsley explained. "I'm not causing disruption, I'm providing supplementary educational experiences. Plus, being an official visitor gives me diplomatic immunity of sorts." "Just wait until McGonagall catches on to what you're doing with the twins," Hermione warned. "That diplomatic immunity won't count for much then. Speaking of which," Pugsley checked his pocket watch, "I need to meet them before our next class. Phase 3 requires precise timing." "Phase 3?" Harry groaned. "What's left to enhance?" "Everything," Pugsley replied mysteriously. "See you at lunch." As Pugsley hurried away, Harry couldn't help feeling both apprehensive and excited about whatever was coming next. Despite the chaos, or perhaps because of it, the school felt more alive than ever. Students were engaged, teachers were adapting, and even the normally rigid educational structure of Hogwarts seemed to be bending rather than breaking under the influence of Addams' style enhancements. There was only one person who seemed thoroughly unappreciative of these developments, Argus Filch. The caretaker had taken to patrolling the corridors with a wild-eyed intensity, muttering about thumbscrews and chains, Mrs. Norris constantly at his heels. Twice already he'd been spotted adding to his resignation letter, only to crumple it up again in frustration. Little did he know that the worst was yet to come. Phase 3 was about to begin, and not even Hogwarts itself could be fully prepared for what Pugsley Addams had planned. Chapter 3, The Great Hogwarts Meltdown. By the end of the week, Hogwarts had transformed into something barely recognizable. The suits of armor now saluted passing students with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Slytherins typically received half-hearted gestures while Hufflepuffs got elaborate bows. Staircases had developed personalities, some becoming encouraging, "You can do it. Just a few more steps," while others turned competitive, "Bet you can't reach the top in under 10 seconds. Even the portraits had changed, occasionally wandering into completely unrelated frames to provide unsolicited commentary on students' fashion choices. "I've created a self-sustaining ecosystem of chaos," Pugsley declared proudly at breakfast Friday morning. "The enhancements are now enhancing themselves." Harry watched as a nearby torch briefly turned its flame into the shape of a dragon before returning to normal. "I'm honestly amazed we haven't been expelled yet." "That's because Dumbledore secretly loves it," Ron said through a mouthful of toast. "Fred and George reckon he's been encouraging Pugsley behind the scenes." "That's preposterous," Hermione scoffed, though she looked uncertain. "Dumbledore wouldn't deliberately undermine the educational structure of Hogwarts." "Wouldn't he, though?" Pugsley raised an eyebrow. "Our meeting was most enlightening. He has quite progressive views on experiential learning." Before Hermione could argue further, the morning mail arrived. Among the usual owls was Pugsley's sinister family raven, carrying a package that emitted faint growling sounds. The bird dropped it directly onto Pugsley's plate, splattering porridge across the table. "Excellent!" Pugsley exclaimed, untying the package with obvious delight. "Wednesday's final contribution to our educational revolution. Do I want to know what's in there?" Harry asked nervously. "Probably not," Pugsley admitted. "Plausible deniability and all that." The package gave another growl, slightly louder this time. "Is that thing alive?" Hermione demanded, edging away. "Technically, no," Pugsley replied, which wasn't remotely reassuring. "It's more accurately described as semi-sentient. A magical construct of Wednesday's design." "Bloody hell," Ron muttered. "Your sister sounds terrifying." "Oh, she is," Pugsley agreed proudly. "This is actually quite tame for her. Last year she created a bouquet of flowers that whispered existential doubts to anyone who smelled them. 3 gardeners had to be institutionalized." The package shuddered again. Harry was about to suggest taking it somewhere less public when Professor McGonagall appeared behind them. "Mr. Addams," she said, her lips pressed into a thin line. "The headmaster would like a word." "Ah. Perfect timing," Pugsley replied cheerfully, tucking the growling package under his arm. "I wanted to discuss the next phase of educational enhancements with him anyway." McGonagall's expression suggested that educational enhancements were exactly what Dumbledore wanted to discuss, though perhaps not in the approving way Pugsley implied. "I'll see you in divination," Pugsley told Harry as he stood. "Don't worry if I'm a bit late. These discussions about revolutionary educational theory can run long." As Pugsley followed McGonagall out of the Great Hall, Harry exchanged concerned glances with Ron and Hermione. "You don't think he's finally gone too far, do you?" Ron asked. "Define too far," Harry replied. "He's animated the furniture, enhanced magical creatures, turned classes into musicals, and somehow convinced Snape to let him brew something called existential dread potion yesterday. Don't forget the living bathroom fixtures," Hermione added. I still can't use the second-floor girls' lavatory because the mirrors keep offering unsolicited psychological evaluations. Mine told me I have unresolved maternal abandonment issues. Myrtle's toilet told me I should consider a career in plumbing. Ron shuddered. Took me 20 minutes to convince it I don't find you Bens appealing. Their first class that morning was divination, which Harry had been dreading. Professor Trelawney's classroom was already the most bizarre place in Hogwarts. He couldn't imagine what Pugsley might have done to enhance it. As they climbed the silver ladder into the tower classroom, the familiar scent of perfumed smoke greeted them, but something was different. The smoke wasn't its usual misty white but shifted through a rainbow of colors, forming shapes that seemed almost deliberate before dissolving again. Professor Trelawney floated forward from the shadows, her enormous eyes magnified behind her glasses. "Welcome, my dears. I sense a powerful mystical presence has been at work in my classroom." She didn't sound upset, if anything, she seemed unusually excited. "Sorry we're late, Professor," Lavender apologized as she and Parvati took their seats. "We got delayed because the suit of armor on the 5th floor insisted on teaching you a medieval dance," Trelawney finished for her. "Yes, I foresaw it this morning." Harry was pretty sure she'd foreseen it because the twins had enchanted all the 5th floor armor to do exactly that between classes, but he kept quiet. "Today," Trelawney continued, "we will explore the mysteries of smoke divination, a branch of the seeing arts that has been spontaneously facilitated by recent mystical adjustments to our classroom." The colored smoke swirled more vigorously, as if responding to her words. Harry could have sworn one cloud briefly formed the shape of Pugsley's face, grinning mischievously before dissipating. "Observe the patterns," Trelawney instructed, waving her hand through a particularly dense cloud of purple smoke. "Open your inner eye and allow the visions to manifest." The class dutifully stared into the swirling colors. Harry saw nothing but random shapes until suddenly, the smoke before him coalesced into a clear image, a massive black dog, similar to the Grim he'd seen before. As he watched, however, the dog transformed, growing rounder until it resembled Pugsley. The smoke Pugsley gave him a wink before the image dissolved. Around the room, students were gasping as personalized visions appeared before each of them. Neville's smoke showed a towering grandmother figure shrinking down to his size. Parvati's displayed what looked like her own reflection, aging decades in seconds. Ron's formed a giant spider that suddenly sprouted a clown's face, causing him to fall backward off his poof with a yelp. "Extraordinary!" Trelawney exclaimed, spinning around to observe the various manifestations. "The inner eye of the collective unconscious has been amplified. I sense the work of an old soul with connections to the beyond." The trapdoor suddenly opened, and Pugsley climbed into the classroom, looking supremely satisfied with himself. "Sorry I'm late, Professor. The headmaster had questions about my enhancement methodologies." "Mr. Addams." Trelawney swooped down upon him, clasping his hands in hers. "My dear boy, you have opened a channel to the other planes. These smoke visions are the clearest I've seen in decades." "Just a small adjustment to your incense," Pugsley explained modestly. "Combined with a reality-thinning charm Granny taught me. The smoke now materializes subconscious imagery specific to each viewer." "Brilliant," Trelawney declared. "Simply brilliant. This is exactly the kind of mystical breakthrough I've been attempting to facilitate for years." Unlike the other professors, who had adapted to Pugsley's enhancements with varying degrees of reluctance and suspicion, Trelawney seemed genuinely thrilled. She spent the rest of the class interrogating him about interdimensional permeability techniques, while the students watched increasingly bizarre personal visions in the enhanced smoke. "I saw myself winning the Quidditch Cup," Ron said as they descended the ladder at the end of class. "Then it turned into a giant chocolate frog that ate the Slytherin team." "I saw myself getting 10 NEWTs, Hermione admitted. "But then all the certificates turned into howlers telling me I'd missed questions that weren't even on the exams." "What did you see, Harry?" Pugsley asked, catching up to them in the corridor. Nothing important, Harry lied, not wanting to discuss the grim-turned Pugsley vision. How did your meeting with Dumbledore go? Swimmingly. Pugsley beamed. He had concerns about the structural integrity of certain enhancements, but once I explained the self-stabilizing chaos theory behind them, he seemed quite impressed. Even suggested a few modifications himself. So you're not in trouble? Hermione asked, sounding disappointed. On the contrary, I've been given official permission to continue my educational revolution, with a few small conditions. Pugsley patted the pocket where he'd stashed the mysterious growling package. Mainly involving advance notice to staff and limitations on permanent transfigurations. That's surprisingly reasonable, Harry said suspiciously. Dumbledore is a reasonable man, Pugsley replied. He understands that true education happens at the edge of comfort. Speaking of which, we should hurry to care of magical creatures. My script modifications should be reaching maturity right about now. Harry had forgotten about the blast-ended Scroots. During their first official Care of Magical Creatures lesson earlier that week, Pugsley had spent the entire time whispering to the creatures in what he called the ancient language of combustible beings. The Scroots had seemed unusually attentive. What exactly did you do to them? Harry asked as they hurried across the grounds toward Hagrid's hut. Just a small intelligence enhancement, Pugsley explained. Combined with some accelerated growth formula and basic command recognition. Nothing fancy. You taught exploding crab-scorpion things to understand commands? Ron looked horrified. Only simple ones, Pugsley assured him. Stop, go, attack, retreat, form battle formation, the essentials. Battle formation? Hermione squeaked. Figure of speech, Pugsley said unconvincingly. They arrived at Hagrid's paddock to find the class already gathered around what were definitely not the same Scroots from earlier in the week. These creatures were now the size of large dogs, their armored shells gleaming with an iridescent sheen that hadn't been present before. Most concerning of all, they seemed to be arranged in a perfect semicircle, all facing Hagrid as if waiting for instructions. Ah, there ya are. Hagrid called out, waving enthusiastically. Come see what's happened to the Scroots. Most amazing development. The Slytherins huddled at the back of the group, looking even less eager than usual to approach the creatures. Malfoy's face was a mask of disgust and fear. Magnificent. Pugsley rushed forward, kneeling beside the nearest Scroot, which turned its eyeless head toward him in apparent recognition. The exoskeleton calcification has progressed exactly as predicted, and the neurolinguistic pathways seem fully established. They've been listening to commands. Hagrid said proudly. Watch this, Scroots, sit. As one, the dozen or so creatures lowered their hind sections to the ground, stingers still raised alertly. Now, roll over. The Scroots obediently rolled onto their backs, legs waving in the air, before righting themselves again with surprising coordination. It's ruddy brilliant. Hagrid beamed at Pugsley. Whatever ye did to them, they're twice as smart as before. Been thinkin' about puttin' together a demonstration for the school, show everyone how misunderstood magical creatures just need the right guidance. That sounds incredibly dangerous, Hermione whispered to Harry. Welcome to Hogwarts under Pugsley's influence, Harry whispered back. Hagrid spent the lesson demonstrating the Scroots' new abilities, which included fetching objects, often by shooting them with precision blasts from their rear ends, forming various geometric patterns on command, and, most alarmingly, identifying specific students when named. Scroots, find Malfoy. Hagrid called out. The creatures immediately turned as one and began advancing on the horrified Slytherin, stopping precisely 1 foot away from him in perfect formation. They won't hurt him, Pugsley assured the class as Malfoy whimpered. They're just demonstrating recognition patterns. Observe, Scroots, retreat. The creatures immediately backed away and returned to their semicircle position. Unless someone says, attack, of course, Pugsley added casually. Then all bets are off. Don't nobody say, attack. Hagrid warned, suddenly looking concerned. That's not a command we've practiced safely yet. The rest of the lesson passed without incident, though the Slytherins kept a nervous distance from both the Scroots and Pugsley. As they headed back to the castle for lunch, Ron was practically bouncing with excitement. Did you see Malfoy's face? I thought he was going to wet himself when those things surrounded him. It's not funny, Ron, Hermione insisted. Those creatures are dangerous enough normally. Making them smarter and teaching them to target specific people is just asking for trouble. They're not targeting anyone, Pugsley corrected. They're identifying. There's a difference. Is there, though? Harry asked. What happens if someone actually does say, attack, around them? Then we get to observe their coordinated assault capabilities, Pugsley replied with disturbing enthusiasm. For educational purposes. You're going to get someone killed, Hermione muttered. Nonsense. Seriously injured at worst, Pugsley assured her. The Scroots understand proportional response. As they entered the Great Hall, Harry noticed something odd. The enchanted ceiling, which normally showed the sky outside, was displaying what looked like a blueprint of Hogwarts, complete with moving dots representing people. Is that the Marauder's map? He asked, confused. Similar concept, different execution, Pugsley explained, looking up with satisfaction. Another ceiling enhancement, this one shows the castle's current status. See those red areas? Those indicate zones of maximum chaos potential. There are a lot of red areas, Harry observed nervously. Indeed. The enhancements are approaching critical synergy, Pugsley rubbed his hands together gleefully. By my calculations, we should achieve total immersive educational environment by tomorrow morning. What does that mean, exactly? Hermione asked. It means, Pugsley said, lowering his voice dramatically, that Hogwarts itself will become the teacher. The building, the grounds, every aspect of the school will actively participate in the educational process. That sounds revolutionary, visionary, brilliantly disruptive, terrifying, Hermione finished flatly. Pugsley beamed. Exactly. The best education always is. Lunch proceeded normally, if you ignored the ceiling occasionally zooming in on specific areas of the castle to highlight unusual activity, primarily Peeves, who seemed to have developed a strange respect for Pugsley and had taken to amplifying the chaos rather than fighting it. Even the poltergeist recognizes a kindred spirit, Pugsley noted proudly as they watched Peeves systematically replacing all the telescopes in the astronomy tower with kaleidoscopes. He's been quite helpful, actually. Has an excellent understanding of the castle's hidden mechanisms. After lunch, they had a free period, which Pugsley insisted they use for final preparations. This apparently meant meeting the Weasley twins in the Room of Requirement, which had transformed into something resembling a cross between a war room and a mad scientist's laboratory. Gentlemen, lady, Fred greeted them as they entered. We've just finished the synchronization matrix. Excellent. Pugsley hurried over to examine a complex diagram hovering in midair, covered in glowing runes and moving parts. Did you incorporate the temporal displacement factor? Double-checked it myself, George confirmed. When this triggers, every enhancement in the castle will activate simultaneously for exactly 3 minutes and 33 seconds. Creating a harmonic convergence of chaos. Pugsley looked like he might cry from joy. It's beautiful. What exactly will this do? Harry asked, examining the diagram with concern. It's the grand finale, Fred explained enthusiastically. Every enhancement Pugsley's made, plus a few of our own contributions, all activating at once in perfect harmony. We're calling it, the Great Hogwarts Awakening, George added. One perfect moment of complete educational anarchy. You can't be serious, Hermione said, looking from the twins to Pugsley. The individual enhancements are already pushing the boundaries of safety. Combining them all at once could be catastrophic. Only in the most educational sense, Pugsley assured her. We've built in fail-safes. Probably. Probably. 93% certainty, Pugsley clarified, which didn't seem to reassure Hermione at all. When is this supposed to happen? Harry asked, feeling a mixture of dread and curiosity. Tomorrow morning at precisely 9:17 a.m., Pugsley answered. During breakfast, when everyone's gathered in the Great Hall. Maximum audience impact. You're going to get us all expelled, Hermione warned. Or worse. Nonsense, Fred scoffed. Dumbledore's given Pugsley permission to continue his educational enhancements. This is just the culmination of the project. I'm pretty sure Dumbledore didn't authorize turning the entire castle into a chaos machine, Harry pointed out. He authorized educational innovation, Pugsley countered. This is simply innovation on a castle-wide scale. Besides, it's temporary, everything will return to normal after the harmonic convergence completes. Normal by whose definition? Hermione demanded. Normal-ish, George offered. With maybe a few lingering effects. For nostalgia. Harry was about to argue further when a loud bang echoed through the castle, followed by what felt like a minor earthquake. What was that? Ron yelped, grabbing a nearby shelf for support. Pugsley checked his pocket watch. That's not scheduled. Perhaps one of the enhancements has achieved spontaneous evolution. Spontaneous what? Harry didn't like the sound of that at all. Evolution. Some of the more complex enhancements were designed with limited self-modification capabilities. Pugsley looked thoughtful rather than concerned. Fascinating. I wonder which one it was. They got their answer when they exited the room of requirement to find the corridor filled with students running in various directions, many looking panicked. What's happening? Hermione stopped a passing Ravenclaw. The gargoyles, the girl gasped. They've all come to life and they're rearranging themselves around the castle. One of them nearly crushed Professor Flitwick. Another tremor shook the castle. Out the window, Harry could see stone gargoyles flying through the air, detaching themselves from their traditional perches and relocating to seemingly random positions around the grounds and castle walls. Ah, Pugsley nodded thoughtfully. The architectural redistribution enhancement. It wasn't supposed to activate until the harmonic convergence, but it appears to have developed an accelerated timeline. You animated all the gargoyles? Hermione looked horrified. Not animated, exactly. More like, granted limited architectural agency. Pugsley watched with academic interest as a particularly large gargoyle flew past the window. They're seeking optimal positioning based on the castle's defensive needs. The castle doesn't have defensive needs. Harry exclaimed. We're not under attack. Not yet, Pugsley agreed. But proper preparation prevents poor performance. The castle is simply optimizing its configuration. Before they could argue further, Professor McGonagall's voice echoed through the corridors, magically amplified, all students are to report to the Great Hall immediately. Remain calm and proceed in an orderly fashion. Do not approach any moving architectural features. We should go, Harry said, already dreading whatever chaos awaited them. The Great Hall was filling rapidly with confused and excited students. The enchanted ceiling now showed a real-time map of the gargoyles' movements, which seemed to be forming some kind of pattern around the castle perimeter. They're creating a defensive formation, Pugsley observed, pointing up at the ceiling. Fascinating. They've developed a hive intelligence. How is that possible? Hermione demanded. Stone statues can't think. Conventional stones, no, Pugsley agreed. But Hogwarts gargoyles have been absorbing magical energy for centuries. My enhancement simply woke them up. At the staff table, the professors were in intense discussion, with Dumbledore listening calmly while Flitwick gesticulated wildly, apparently describing his near miss with a relocated gargoyle. Snape looked irritated, McGonagall concerned, and Hagrid seemed oddly excited. Attention, please, Dumbledore's voice silenced the hall as he rose to his feet. It appears we are experiencing what might be called an architectural rearrangement. There is no immediate danger, but I must ask all students to remain inside the castle until the gargoyles have completed their reorganization. His eyes twinkled slightly as they found Pugsley in the crowd. Mr. Addams, perhaps you would be good enough to join me after this announcement to discuss the educational opportunities presented by this development. Pugsley stood. Of course, Headmaster. I'd be delighted to provide technical consultation on the gargoyle redistribution dynamics. Whispers broke out across the hall as students put two and two together. By now, everyone knew about Pugsley's enhancements, but this was on a different scale entirely. As a precautionary measure, classes will be suspended for the remainder of the day, Dumbledore continued, prompting cheers from many students. Heads of houses, please escort your students to their common rooms after lunch. Mr. Filch will coordinate with the house elves to ensure meals are delivered there for dinner. At the mention of his name, Harry noticed Filch standing near the entrance, his face a mask of barely contained fury. The caretaker's eyes were fixed on Pugsley with an intensity that was almost frightening, his fingers twitching as if imagining them around Pugsley's throat. I think Filch has reached his breaking point, Harry whispered to Ron as Dumbledore concluded his announcement. Breaking point? Ron snorted. He's so far past that, he can't even see it anymore. Fred told me he found Filch crying in a broom closet yesterday, clutching a resignation letter. Pugsley made his way to the staff table while the rest of them joined the Gryffindor table for lunch. The ceiling continued to track the gargoyles' movements, which were gradually slowing as they apparently found their optimal positions. You have to admit, it's pretty impressive, Ron said, watching the display. Mental, obviously, but impressive. It's reckless, Hermione insisted. What if one of those gargoyles had hit someone? Pugsley said they have positioning awareness, Harry pointed out, though he shared Hermione's concerns. They're apparently avoiding occupied spaces. And you believe that? Hermione raised an eyebrow. No, Harry admitted. But Dumbledore doesn't seem overly concerned, which means either he knows something we don't, or he's finally lost it completely. Bit of both, probably, Ron suggested through a mouthful of shepherd's pie. Lunch concluded without Pugsley's return, and the Gryffindors were escorted back to their common room by a tense-looking McGonagall. Professor, Hermione ventured as they walked, is the situation with the gargoyles under control? Define control, Miss Granger, McGonagall replied dryly. The headmaster and Mr. Addams assure me that the architectural redistribution is proceeding according to the castle's own internal logic and will conclude naturally by nightfall. The castle has internal logic? Harry asked, surprised. McGonagall gave him a considering look. Mr. Potter, Hogwarts has stood for over 1,000 years, saturated with the magic of countless witches and wizards. It would be more surprising if it hadn't developed certain preferences. So the castle is alive? Ron looked disturbed by the idea. Not alive in the conventional sense, McGonagall clarified. But not entirely inanimate either. Mr. Addams seems to have an unusual talent for communicating with such magical constructs. They reached the portrait of the fat lady, who looked unusually excited. Is it true? She asked McGonagall. The gargoyles are redistributing themselves. Bernard from the 3rd floor told me they're forming constellations when viewed from above. I wouldn't know, as I haven't had the opportunity to observe the castle from a dragon's perspective today, McGonagall replied tersely. Fortuna Major. The portrait swung open, and the Gryffindors filed into the common room, which was soon buzzing with excited speculation about the gargoyle situation and what other enhancements might spontaneously activate. This is getting out of hand, Hermione muttered as they claimed chairs by the fire. If the gargoyles can spontaneously decide to rearrange themselves, what's stopping the suits of armor from doing the same? Or the staircases? Or the whole castle? Don't give the castle ideas, Ron warned, looking nervously at the walls around them. I'm more concerned about tomorrow's grand finale, Harry admitted. If one enhancement going rogue can cause this much disruption, what's going to happen when they all activate at once? Educational revolution, came Pugsley's voice as he climbed through the portrait hole, looking immensely satisfied. The dawn of a new era in magical instruction. What did Dumbledore say? Hermione demanded as he joined them. He was fascinated by the gargoyles' emergent intelligence, Pugsley replied, settling into an armchair. Apparently, they've been trying to rearrange themselves for centuries, but lacked the unified impetus until my enhancement provided it. So he's not angry? Harry asked, surprised. On the contrary, he's ordered the house elves to prepare a special dessert in celebration once the gargoyles complete their repositioning. Pugsley chuckled. Dumbledore has a much deeper understanding of architectural consciousness than most wizards. Did you know he carries on regular conversations with the castle? That's not in Hogwarts, a history, Hermione said suspiciously. Of course not. Some relationships are too personal for historical documentation. Pugsley pulled out his pocket watch. The gargoyles should complete their redistribution in approximately 43 minutes. Then we'll be able to appreciate the full pattern. And tomorrow? Harry asked hesitantly. Is the grand finale still happening? Absolutely, Pugsley confirmed. With Dumbledore's blessing, no less. He made a few suggestions for additional harmonizing elements, actually. The man has a surprisingly chaotic mind beneath that serene exterior. The thought of Dumbledore actively contributing to Pugsley's castle-wide chaos experiment was both reassuring and deeply concerning. Either the headmaster knew something they didn't about the safety of the plan, or he was as mad as Pugsley. For the rest of the afternoon, they watched through the common room windows as gargoyles continued their aerial ballet around the castle. As sunset approached, the movement slowed, with each gargoyle settling into what appeared to be a carefully chosen position. Look! Colin Creevey called out, pointing excitedly. They're glowing. Sure enough, as darkness fell, the repositioned gargoyles began to emit a soft, bluish light. From the Gryffindor Tower, they could see dozens of glowing points across the castle walls and grounds. The pattern is complete, Pugsley announced with satisfaction. Now we wait for moonrise. What happens at moonrise? Harry asked, not sure he wanted to know. The gargoyles will channel ambient magical energy to create a school-wide protective enchantment, Pugsley explained. At least, that's the theory. It's never been attempted on this scale before. You mean you don't know what's going to happen? Hermione looked horrified. Science is about discovery, Hermione, Pugsley replied calmly. If we knew exactly what would happen, it wouldn't be an experiment. The moon rose about an hour later, a perfect full circle climbing above the forbidden forest. As its light touched the first glowing gargoyles, something extraordinary happened. Beams of silvery blue light shot between the statues, connecting them in an intricate web that soon covered the entire castle. The light pulsed once, twice, then flared brilliantly before settling into a gentle, shimmering dome that enclosed all of Hogwarts. Beautiful, Pugsley whispered, his round face illuminated by the ethereal light. The castle's protecting itself. Just as I hypothesized. Protecting itself from what? Ron asked nervously. That's the interesting part, Pugsley replied. I didn't specify a threat. The castle chose its own defensive priority. As they watched, the shimmering dome pulsed again, and suddenly every window in Gryffindor Tower frosted over, obscuring their view of the grounds. What's happening now? Harry asked, a sense of unease growing. Fascinating, Pugsley murmured, pressing his hand against the frosted glass. It appears the castle has identified a threat and is implementing containment protocols. What threat? Hermione demanded. What have you done? Before Pugsley could answer, Professor McGonagall's voice echoed through the common room. All students are to remain in their dormitories until further notice. I repeat, do not leave your dormitories. This is not a drill. The Gryffindors exchanged nervous glances. This was beyond the usual Hogwarts weirdness, even by the new Pugsley enhanced standards. "Pugsley," Harry said firmly, "what's going on?" "I'm not entirely sure," Pugsley admitted, looking more intrigued than concerned. "The gargoyle network was designed to enhance the castle's natural defenses, but the specific response is determined by the castle itself. It appears Hogwarts has detected something it considers a significant threat." "Like what?" Ron asked. "You know who? Dementors? Giant spiders? Or perhaps something less conventional," Pugsley mused. "The castle has its own perspective on danger, formed over centuries of magical habitation. Its priorities may not align with human concerns." A loud bang from somewhere deep in the castle made them all jump. It was followed by another, then another, like massive footsteps approaching. "That doesn't sound good," Harry muttered, reaching instinctively for his wand. "On the contrary, it sounds fascinating," Pugsley corrected, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "The castle is mobilizing." "Mobilizing?" Hermione repeated weakly. "What does that mean?" They got their answer moments later when the entire tower shuddered, then began to move. Not a gentle swaying, but a deliberate repositioning, as if the tower itself was adjusting its stance. "The castle is reconfiguring for optimal defensive posture," Pugsley explained, maintaining his balance with practiced ease while other students stumbled. "Just like the gargoyles, but on a macro scale. The castle isn't supposed to move," Hermione cried, clinging to an armchair as the floor tilted slightly. "Conventional wisdom, but apparently incorrect," Pugsley replied. "Hogwarts seems quite capable of movement when properly motivated." The movement continued for several minutes, with various sections of the castle apparently shifting positions relative to each other. From their limited vantage point in the frosted-over tower, they could only feel the changes rather than see them. Finally, the movement ceased. The common room was silent except for the nervous breathing of dozens of Gryffindors, all waiting for something else to happen. "I believe the reconfiguration is complete," Pugsley announced. "Now we wait to see what the castle does next." "Does next?" Ron squeaked. "It's a building. It's not supposed to do anything." "That's a very limited perspective on architectural consciousness," Pugsley chided. "Granny always says that old buildings are just sleeping giants waiting for the right alarm clock." Before Ron could respond, the frosting on the windows suddenly cleared, allowing them to see outside again. The view had changed dramatically. Where once they could see the lake and forest, they now faced the main gates of Hogwarts, as if the tower had rotated nearly 180 degrees. More concerning was what stood beyond those gates, a swirling, dark mass that seemed to be pressing against the shimmering dome of protective magic. "What is that?" Harry asked, moving closer to the window. "Dementors," Hermione whispered, her face pale. "Dozens of them." She was right. The dark creatures floated just beyond the castle's new magical barrier, their hooded forms eerily illuminated by the protective dome's light. They seemed to be searching for a way in, occasionally pressing against the barrier only to be repelled. The castle detected them as the primary threat, Pugsley observed, watching the Dementors with academic interest. "Interesting choice. I would have expected it to prioritize structural threats over emotional ones." "Maybe the castle cares about its students' well-being," Harry suggested, feeling a strange affection for the ancient building that was apparently trying to protect them. "A sentient structure developing empathy for its inhabitants," Pugsley nodded thoughtfully. "Granny would be fascinated. Most buildings in our experience tend toward malevolence rather than protection." Professor McGonagall's voice echoed through the common room again, "Students, please remain calm. The castle has initiated defensive measures against the Dementor Patrol, which appears to have attempted an unauthorized entry. The Ministry has been notified, and the situation is under control." "Under control?" Ron scoffed. "The castle just rearranged itself like a giant puzzle box. How is that under control?" "The rearrangement appears to be tactical," Pugsley pointed out. "Notice how the most vulnerable areas have been rotated inward, while the stronger, more heavily warded sections now faced the threat. It's quite brilliant, really. Harry had to admit the castle's response was impressive, if terrifying. Hogwarts had effectively turned itself into a fortress, with the Dementors unable to penetrate its defenses. Will it go back to normal once the Dementors leave? Hermione asked. Probably, Pugsley replied, not sounding entirely convinced. Though having awakened to its defensive capabilities, the castle may be reluctant to return to its previous vulnerable configuration. Great, Ron muttered. So now we have a castle with an opinion about its own layout. What's next? The toilets deciding they'd rather be fountains? Don't give the castle ideas, Harry warned, only half joking. They spent the next hour watching the Dementors circle the protective dome, occasionally testing it but never breaking through. Finally, a group of figures appeared at the gates, Professor Dumbledore, accompanied by what looked like ministry officials. A brief, apparently heated conversation ensued, with Dumbledore gesturing emphatically toward the Dementors while a man in official-looking robes, who Harry guessed was from the ministry, responded defensively. Eventually, the Dementors began to retreat, floating reluctantly back toward the boundaries of the school grounds. As the last Dementor disappeared from view, the protective dome pulsed once more before fading away. Almost immediately, the castle began to shift again, towers and walls returning to their original positions with surprisingly little disruption. It's resetting, Pugsley observed, sounding slightly disappointed. Pity. The defensive configuration was much more architecturally interesting. I prefer my dormitory in its original location, thank you very much, Hermione replied firmly. Within minutes, Gryffindor Tower had returned to its normal position, with its usual view of the grounds restored. The common room erupted in excited chatter as students compared experiences and theories about what had just happened. I can't believe the castle just moved, Neville said, looking both frightened and impressed. Gran always said Hogwarts was special, but I thought she meant the magic taught here, not the building itself. The most powerful magic often resides in places rather than people, Pugsley explained, taking on a professorial tone. Locations with centuries of magical habitation develop their own forms of consciousness. It's why the Addams family mansion occasionally rearranges rooms based on its mood. Your house does this too? Ron looked horrified. Not as dramatically, Pugsley admitted. Usually just shifting doorways to create dead ends when it's feeling mischievous, or extending corridors when it wants solitude. Standard haunted house behavior, really. Professor McGonagall entered the common room, looking simultaneously exhausted and alert. Students, the situation has been resolved. The Dementors have been ordered to maintain their patrol at the proper boundaries and not approach the castle itself. The headmaster will provide a full explanation at breakfast tomorrow. Her eyes found Pugsley. Mr. Addams, the headmaster would like to see you in his office immediately. The password is, Fizzing Whiz-Bee. As Pugsley left with McGonagall, the remaining Gryffindors speculated wildly about what had just happened and whether Pugsley would be expelled for effectively awakening the castle. He won't be expelled, Harry said confidently. Dumbledore seemed impressed by the gargoyles earlier. And the castle's defenses worked perfectly against the Dementors. That's not the point, Hermione argued. Pugsley didn't know what would happen when he enhanced the gargoyles. The castle could have collapsed instead of reorganizing itself. But it didn't, Ron pointed out. And now we know Hogwarts can protect itself if it needs to. That's pretty wicked, actually. Harry had to agree. Despite the chaos and uncertainty, there was something reassuring about discovering that Hogwarts itself could act in their defense. It made the ancient castle feel even more like home. Pugsley returned about an hour later, looking thoughtful but not distressed. Well? Harry asked as Pugsley rejoined them by the fire. What did Dumbledore say? Are you in trouble? Not exactly, Pugsley replied, settling into an armchair. He was quite impressed with the castle's defensive capabilities. Apparently, the Dementors were attempting to expand their patrol area without authorization, and Hogwarts objected. So you're not being punished? Hermione sounded disappointed. On the contrary, I've been asked to document the entire experience for the school archives. Pugsley smiled. Dumbledore believes it's the first recorded instance of Hogwarts taking direct defensive action of its own accord. What about tomorrow? Harry asked. Is the grand finale still happening? With some modifications, Pugsley confirmed. Dumbledore feels that after tonight's excitement, a more controlled demonstration would be appropriate. He suggested focusing the harmonic convergence on the Great Hall only, rather than the entire castle. That's probably wise, Hermione admitted. If the whole castle gets involved again, who knows what might happen. Precisely why it would have been more scientifically valuable, Pugsley sighed. But I understand the cautious approach after tonight's unexpected developments. As curfew approached, they headed up to their dormitories, the day's excitement leaving them exhausted but too wired to sleep immediately. Harry lay awake for some time, thinking about the castle's response to the Dementors and what it might mean. Pugsley, he whispered into the darkness of the dormitory. Do you really think Hogwarts is conscious? Not in the human sense, came Pugsley's reply after a moment. But it has awareness, memory, and preferences. By most philosophical definitions, that constitutes a form of consciousness. And your enhancements woke it up somehow. More like gave it a voice, Pugsley clarified. It's always been aware, but lacked the means to express that awareness directly. The Gargoyle Network provided a framework for more complex action. Harry considered this. Do you think it's listening to us right now? A brief silence followed, then Pugsley chuckled softly. Probably. The walls have always had ears at Hogwarts, now they just might do something with what they hear. With that slightly unsettling thought, Harry finally drifted off to sleep, dreaming of moving corridors and watchful gargoyles. Breakfast the next morning was abuzz with excitement. Students from all houses shared their experiences of the castle's movement, with each telling growing more elaborate than the last. By the time Dumbledore stood to address the hall, the rumors had escalated to include the castle growing legs and walking around the lake. Good morning, Dumbledore began, his eyes twinkling as he surveyed the eager faces before him. I imagine you all have questions about last night's unusual events. That's putting it mildly, Ron muttered. What you witnessed was something quite extraordinary, Hogwarts Castle exercising its inherent defensive capabilities that have lain dormant for centuries. Dumbledore gestured toward Pugsley, who sat at the Gryffindor table. Thanks to the, educational enhancements initiated by our guest, Mr. Addams, the castle's natural protective instincts were awakened just in time to address an unauthorized Dementor incursion. Whispers broke out across the hall. Pugsley beamed with pride. The Ministry has assured me that the Dementors have been firmly instructed to maintain their proper patrol boundaries, Dumbledore continued. However, it is reassuring to know that Hogwarts itself stands ready to protect its inhabitants if necessary. He paused, his expression becoming more serious. That said, I must caution against any attempts to replicate or expand upon Mr. Addams' enhancements without proper supervision. Awakening ancient magic carries both benefits and risks that must be carefully balanced. His eyes twinkled again as they met Pugsley's. To conclude our educational exchange with Mr. Addams, I have approved a final demonstration of enhancement techniques, to be conducted here in the Great Hall immediately following breakfast. Those who wish to observe are welcome to stay, those who prefer a more conventional morning may proceed to the library or their common rooms. Not a single student moved toward the exit. If anything, everyone seemed to edge forward in anticipation. Very well, Dumbledore smiled. Mr. Addams, whenever you are ready. Pugsley stood, checking his pocket watch. 9:15, he announced. The harmonic convergence will commence in exactly 2 minutes. I suggest everyone remain seated for optimal viewing experience. Harry exchanged nervous glances with Ron and Hermione. Despite the reduced scale, he had a feeling this demonstration would still be spectacular, and potentially chaotic. As the final seconds ticked down, Pugsley withdrew the mysterious package he'd received from Wednesday, which had been growling intermittently throughout breakfast. "What is that?" Hermione asked suspiciously. "The catalyst," Pugsley explained, carefully unwrapping the package to reveal what looked like a small, shriveled head made of some unidentifiable material. "Wednesday's contribution, a chaos focus." "Is that a—" Ron began. "Not a real head," Pugsley assured him. "It's a construct made from various magical materials. It channels and amplifies chaotic magical energy." The shriveled head's eyes suddenly snapped open, revealing swirling vortices of color where eyeballs should have been. It grinned, displaying pointed teeth, then began to emit a low humming sound. 917, Pugsley announced. "Harmonic convergence initiating, now." He placed the chaos focus on the table before him. The humming increased in volume, and the head began to spin, slowly at first, then faster and faster until it became a blur. For a moment, nothing else happened. Students exchanged confused glances, some looking disappointed by the anticlimactic display. Then, all at once, chaos erupted. The enchanted ceiling, which had been showing a clear blue sky, exploded into a kaleidoscope of magical phenomena, aurora-like lights in impossible colors, miniature galaxies forming and dissolving, and what appeared to be the history of Hogwarts played out in rapid, swirling imagery. The house banners unraveled themselves and rewove into animated tapestries showing the founders in various heroic and comical poses. Godric Gryffindor fenced with his sword, Rowena Ravenclaw solved complex equations in midair, Helga Hufflepuff organized badgers into dance formations, and Salazar Slytherin charmed snakes to spell out sarcastic commentary on the other founders' activities. The floating candles detached from their usual positions and began an elaborate aerial ballet, leaving trails of multicolored fire that formed three-dimensional patterns above the tables. Some spelled out students' names, while others created miniature replicas of famous magical monuments that hovered briefly before dissolving into showers of harmless sparks. The suits of armor stationed around the Great Hall marched to the center and began a synchronized dance routine that would have impressed professional choreographers, occasionally launching into impossible acrobatic maneuvers that regular armor shouldn't have been capable of. The floor briefly became transparent, revealing not the foundations of the castle but what appeared to be an underwater scene complete with mere people waving up at the startled students. This lasted only moments before shifting to a view of stars and planets, giving the impression that the Great Hall was floating in space. Every goblet and plate on every table began to hover, arranging themselves into complex three-dimensional patterns before returning to their places, now filled with constantly color-changing drinks and foods that tasted like whatever the consumer most desired at that moment. The staff table transformed into a stage, where illusory versions of the professors performed an operatic rendition of Hogwarts' greatest magical mishaps, complete with exaggerated recreations of famous classroom disasters. Professor Snape's illusory counterpart seemed particularly offended by this display, while the real Snape watched with an expression caught between outrage and reluctant amusement. And in the center of it all, Pugsley's chaos focus spun faster and faster, the shriveled head now laughing maniacally as it coordinated the harmonized enhancements. Students gasped, cheered, and occasionally ducked as the magical spectacle unfolded around them. Even Hermione seemed captivated by the display, her concerns temporarily forgotten in the face of such extraordinary magic. 3 minutes of perfectly synchronized chaos, Pugsley explained proudly over the commotion. Every enhancement calibrated to harmonize with the others for maximum educational impact. "It's brilliant!" Ron shouted as a miniature dragon made entirely of dessert forks swooped over their table, breathing whipped cream on delighted first-years. Even the teachers seemed impressed, with Flitwick openly applauding the charm work, McGonagall studying the transfigurations with professional interest, and Dumbledore beaming like a child at a particularly good birthday party. The only staff member who didn't appear to be enjoying the display was Filch. The caretaker stood rigid near the entrance, his face cycling through various shades of purple as he watched months of meticulous cleaning and organizing undone in minutes. Mrs. Norris hid behind his legs, hissing at a nearby suit of armor that had briefly transformed into a mechanical dog. 3, 2, 1. Pugsley counted down as the chaos reached its climax. Harmonic dissolution commencing. The chaos focus began to spin in the opposite direction, gradually slowing as the various magical effects started to fade. The ceiling settled back into showing the sky, the suits of armor returned to their posts, and the floating objects drifted back to their proper places. Within moments, the Great Hall had almost returned to normal, with a few exceptions. The house banners remained as animated tapestries, though the figures now stood still, moving only occasionally to wink at passing students. The floor retained a slight transparency, giving the impression of great depths beneath. And the ceiling, while once again showing the sky, now included tiny, moving constellations that weren't visible in the daytime sky outside. Residual enhancements, Pugsley explained, looking satisfied as the chaos focus finally stopped spinning. Harmonic echoes that will gradually fade over the next few days. Or weeks. Possibly months for the more deeply integrated ones. The Great Hall erupted in applause, students and most teachers clearly impressed by the display. Dumbledore stood, raising his hands for silence. A most educational demonstration, Mr. Addams, he declared with a smile. I believe I speak for many when I say that Hogwarts has never seen such a comprehensive enhancement of its magical ambience. Thank you, Headmaster, Pugsley replied, bowing slightly. The castle provided an excellent foundation to work with. Very responsive to creative adjustments. Indeed. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. Now, I believe we should allow students to proceed to their classes, which will resume as normal, or as normal as possible, given the circumstances. As students began filing out of the Great Hall, still chattering excitedly about the spectacle they'd witnessed, Harry noticed something concerning. Filch hadn't moved from his position by the door, but his face had gone from purple to an alarming shade of white. The caretaker's hands trembled, and his eyes remained fixed on the chaos focus, which was now sitting innocently on the Gryffindor table, its eyes closed once more. Pugsley, Harry whispered, nudging his friend. I think Filch is having some kind of breakdown. Pugsley followed Harry's gaze and observed the caretaker with academic interest. Fascinating. A classic case of chaos-induced cognitive dissonance. His ordered worldview is collapsing in the face of sanctioned disorder. Should we do something? Harry asked uncertainly. Observe, Pugsley replied. This is a natural psychological process that must run its course. They didn't have to wait long. As the last students exited, leaving only the staff, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Pugsley in the Great Hall, Filch suddenly straightened up. His expression shifted from shock to grim determination as he marched directly to the staff table. Headmaster, he announced, his voice cracking slightly. I quit. Dumbledore looked surprised. Now, Argus, no, Filch cut him off, pulling a crumpled parchment from his pocket and slapping it on the table. I've written this resignation letter 17 times over the years. Never had the courage to submit it before. But this, he gestured wildly at the Great Hall with its lingering enhancements, this is beyond endurance. Mr. Filch, please consider, McGonagall began. I have considered. Filch's voice rose to a near shout. 13 years I've scraped chewing gum from the undersides of desks. 13 years I've mopped up exploded potions and tracked down students after curfew. I've endured the Weasley twins, poltergeists, and enchanted toilets. But this, he pointed a shaking finger at Pugsley, this deliberate, systematic, approved chaos? No. No. Mrs. Norris yowled in apparent agreement from between his legs. The castle moved yesterday. Filch continued, now in full rant mode. Moved. Do you have any idea what that does to the dust accumulation patterns? The cobweb distribution? The cleaning schedule? The teachers exchanged concerned glances. Dumbledore's expression was sympathetic but also slightly amused. And now this. This. Demonstration. Filch spat the word like a curse. There are sparkles embedded in the ceiling now. Sparkles. They'll never come out. Never. Mr. Filch, Dumbledore said gently, perhaps after a short vacation, no vacations. No second chances. I am done. Filch grabbed his resignation letter and thrust it into Dumbledore's hands. Mrs. Norris and I will be gone by nightfall. Let the castle clean itself, since it's apparently so clever now. With that, he turned and stormed out of the great hall, Mrs. Norris trotting indignantly behind him. The doors slammed shut with a dramatic bang that echoed through the suddenly silent room. After a moment, Pugsley spoke. That went better than expected. I calculated a 73% probability of physical violence before resignation. McGonagall closed her eyes briefly, as if praying for patience. Mr. Addams, while your educational contributions have been most enlightening, I believe we may need to discuss the concept of moderation. A foreign concept to the Addams family, Pugsley admitted cheerfully. We prefer extremes in all things. So we've noticed, Snape commented dryly. Dumbledore studied Filch's resignation letter with a thoughtful expression. Well, this presents an interesting staffing challenge. A castle of this size requires considerable maintenance, enhanced self-awareness notwithstanding. The house elves could handle additional responsibilities, McGonagall suggested. Perhaps, Dumbledore agreed. Though they have their own areas of expertise. If I might make a suggestion, Pugsley offered, the castle itself could assume some of the maintenance functions. Now that its awareness has been heightened, it might appreciate a more active role in its own upkeep. The teachers stared at him. Are you suggesting, Snape said slowly, that Hogwarts castle should essentially clean itself? With proper encouragement and a few additional enhancements, yes, Pugsley confirmed. The gargoyles have already demonstrated an aptitude for self-organization. The suits of armor could be similarly tasked with basic maintenance duties. Animated architecture as janitorial staff, Flitwick mused, looking intrigued despite himself. It's not without precedent in magical buildings. The ministry's maintenance department uses enchanted mops and brooms, after all. On a much smaller scale, McGonagall pointed out. And without the potential for architectural sentience developing its own opinions about cleaning priorities. That's what makes it interesting. Pugsley exclaimed. The castle might develop unique aesthetic preferences. Imagine a Hogwarts that rearranges its furnishings seasonally, or creates new architectural features based on educational needs. Harry could see that despite their reservations, several of the professors were actually considering Pugsley's outlandish suggestion. Dumbledore in particular seemed quite taken with the idea, his eyes twinkling merrily. A self-maintaining Hogwarts, the headmaster mused. It would certainly be a first in magical educational history. And potentially a disaster, McGonagall added firmly. What happens if the castle decides it prefers Gothic spires to turrets and begins remodeling itself during examinations? Parameters could be established, Pugsley suggested. Times for acceptable architectural experimentation versus periods of required stability. Like designated quiet hours in a dormitory, but for building modifications. Harry couldn't believe they were seriously discussing this. He exchanged incredulous glances with Ron and Hermione, who looked equally stunned. They're not actually considering it, are they? Ron whispered. I think they are, Hermione replied, sounding both horrified and fascinated. Hogwarts might become the first self-cleaning, self-modifying magical school in history. All because Pugsley drove Filch to quit, Harry added, shaking his head in amazement. After much debate among the staff, with Pugsley occasionally interjecting additional outlandish suggestions, Dumbledore finally brought the discussion to a close. This requires further consideration, he announced. For now, we will ask the house elves to assume Mr. Filch's essential duties while we explore Mr. Addams' more innovative proposals. Perhaps a controlled test in a limited area of the castle would be prudent. The dungeons volunteer, Snape said unexpectedly. When everyone stared at him, he added, if we're to experiment with architectural sentience, best to do so in the most structurally sound portion of the castle. The dungeons can withstand considerable magical stress without compromising the upper floors. A sensible suggestion, Severus, Dumbledore agreed. We shall begin there, once we've developed appropriate parameters and safety measures. As the teachers continued their discussion, Pugsley rejoined Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Well, he asked, looking immensely satisfied. What did you think of the harmonic convergence? It was incredible, Ron admitted. Completely mental, but incredible. The magic involved must have been extraordinarily complex, Hermione said, academic curiosity temporarily overriding her disapproval. How did you coordinate so many different types of enchantments simultaneously? The chaos focus served as a synchronization hub, Pugsley explained. Wednesday designed it specifically to harmonize disparate magical frequencies. It's one of her specialties, controlled magical discord. And you actually got Filch to quit, Harry added, still amazed. I didn't think anything could make him leave Hogwarts. Everyone has a breaking point, Pugsley said sagely. Even the most dedicated misanthropes. It was simply a matter of finding the precise type and quantity of chaos that would exceed his tolerance threshold. So that was your plan all along? Hermione asked. To drive Filch away. One of several objectives, Pugsley confirmed. Educational enhancement, architectural awakening, and caretaker liberation, all achieved within a single week. Father will be most impressed with the efficiency. As they left the Great Hall, Harry noticed students pointing and whispering excitedly. Word of Filch's resignation had spread with typical Hogwarts speed, and the general response seemed to be a mixture of disbelief and celebration. Is it true? Fred Weasley asked, intercepting them in the corridor. Filch actually quit. Stormed out in a rage, Ron confirmed gleefully. You should have seen it, best temper tantrum ever. This calls for a celebration. George declared. Party in the Gryffindor common room tonight. What about Mrs. Norris? Ginny asked, joining the conversation. Is she leaving too? Package deal, Harry confirmed. She seemed as done with Hogwarts as Filch was. This is the greatest day in Hogwarts history, Fred said solemnly. Pugsley Addams, you are officially our hero. We're not worthy. He and George bowed dramatically. Pugsley accepted their adoration with modest dignity. Merely applying Addams' family principles to an educational setting. Chaos is the greatest teacher, after all. The day passed in a blur of excitement. Classes were technically in session, but most teachers spent the time discussing the morning's spectacle and Filch's dramatic departure rather than following their lesson plans. Even Snape seemed distracted during potions, occasionally glancing thoughtfully at the dungeon walls as if assessing their potential for sentience. By dinner, rumors were circulating about Pugsley's proposed self-maintaining castle, each version more elaborate than the last. According to the latest Ravenclaw theory, Hogwarts would soon grow legs and be able to relocate seasonally, spending winters in the Mediterranean and summers in Scotland. The idea has merit, Pugsley commented when Harry mentioned this rumor. Though the energy requirements would be prohibitive. Perhaps a floating enchantment would be more efficient for long-distance castle movement. You're not actually planning to make Hogwarts mobile, are you? Hermione asked, alarmed. Not without extensive testing and approval, Pugsley assured her. Though I've left detailed notes with Professor Dumbledore for future consideration. The Gryffindor celebration that night was legendary. Fred and George had outdone themselves, somehow procuring butterbeer, snacks, and decorations that included animated miniatures of Filch running from various magical pranks. Pugsley was the guest of honor, receiving more backslaps and congratulations than Harry had seen directed at anyone outside of a Quidditch victory. Speech, someone called as the party reached its peak. The cry was taken up around the common room. Speech! Speech! Pugsley stood on a chair, holding up his hands for quiet. Fellow students of Hogwarts, he began solemnly. Today marks not an ending, but but a beginning. The departure of Mr. Filch represents the castle's first step towards self-determination. Cheers erupted at this. For too long, this magnificent building has been treated as merely a backdrop for magical education, Pugsley continued once the noise died down. But as we've discovered this week, Hogwarts itself has much to teach us, about magic, about architectural consciousness, and about the beauty of controlled chaos. More cheers and applause. I leave tomorrow to return to my family, Pugsley announced, causing groans of disappointment. But my brief time here has, I hope, planted seeds that will continue to grow. Remember, education isn't found in textbooks or structured lessons, but in the unexpected, the unpredictable, and occasionally, the mildly terrifying. The common room erupted in thunderous applause. Fred and George lifted Pugsley onto their shoulders and paraded him around the room while chanting, "Addams! Addams! Addams!" Later, as the party finally wound down, Harry found himself sitting with Pugsley, Ron, and Hermione by the fire. "I can't believe you're leaving already," Harry said, realizing how much he'd come to enjoy Pugsley's bizarre perspective and boundless enthusiasm for chaos. "Educational exchanges must end eventually," Pugsley replied philosophically. "But I've learned a great deal about structured magical education, and hopefully left behind some valuable insights in return." "That's one word for it," Hermione said dryly. "Hogwarts will never be the same again." "The highest compliment an Addams can receive," Pugsley beamed. "Permanent alteration of perceived reality is our specialty." "Will you come back someday?" Ron asked. "Maybe for a longer visit?" "Perhaps," Pugsley nodded thoughtfully. "Or Wednesday might come instead. She's expressed interest in experiencing Hogwarts firsthand after my reports." Harry tried to imagine the sister Pugsley had described, allegedly even more disturbing and chaos-prone than Pugsley himself, loose in Hogwarts. The thought was equally terrifying and intriguing. "If she does come," Harry said, "warn us first so we can prepare appropriate defenses." Pugsley laughed. "No defense is adequate against Wednesday when she's determined. But I'll send word regardless." As the common room emptied, with tired but happy Gryffindors heading to bed, Harry realized how much he would miss the strange round boy who had turned Hogwarts upside down in just 1 week. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For what?" Pugsley asked. "For making this the most interesting start to a school year ever," Harry replied honestly. "And for showing me that Hogwarts is even more magical than I thought." Pugsley smiled, a genuine expression without his usual mischievous undertone. "That's the true magic, Harry, not the spells or potions, but the way places and people can surprise you when given the chance to be their authentic selves." It was surprisingly profound coming from someone who had spent the week creating singing suits of armor and teaching gargoyles to rearrange themselves. "One last question," Hermione said as they prepared to head up to their dormitories. "Was all of this really just an educational exchange? Or did your family send you here with specific chaos-causing instructions?" Pugsley's smile turned enigmatic. "Let's just say that the Addams family has a long tradition of testing magical institutions. Hogwarts passed with flying colors. Most schools collapse entirely when exposed to even half this level of Addams' influence." With that disturbing revelation, they said their goodnights and headed to bed. Harry fell asleep wondering what other magical schools the Addams family had inadvertently destroyed in their quest for educational enhancement. The next morning, Pugsley's departure was marked with surprising ceremony. Dumbledore insisted on a formal farewell in the Great Hall, where the entire school gathered to see him off. "Students and staff," Dumbledore announced, "today we bid farewell to Mr. Pugsley Addams, whose brief but remarkably impactful visit has transformed our understanding of Hogwarts' magical potential." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall. Even the Slytherins, who had initially been dismissive of Pugsley, seemed genuinely sorry to see him go. In recognition of his unique contributions, Dumbledore continued, "I am pleased to present Mr. Addams with a special award for educational innovation and architectural awakening, the first of its kind at Hogwarts." He handed Pugsley a small golden plaque, which appeared to be animated, occasionally reshaping itself into different forms before returning to its original state. "Thank you, Headmaster," Pugsley said, accepting the award with unusual solemnity. "I shall treasure this reminder of the most educational week of my life." Additionally, Dumbledore added with a twinkle in his eye, "I'm pleased to announce that we've approved an extended educational exchange program with the Addams family, to commence next year with the arrival of Miss Wednesday Addams, who will join us for a full term of study and, enhancement." Excited whispers broke out across the hall. The Weasley twins looked like Christmas had come early. Snape, interestingly, appeared more intrigued than concerned. And finally, Dumbledore concluded, "Regarding the matter of castle maintenance following Mr. Filch's departure, we will be implementing Mr. Addams' suggestion on a trial basis. Limited architectural autonomy will be granted to specific areas of the castle, beginning with the dungeons, under Professor Snape's supervision." This announcement caused even more of a stir. Students exchanged nervous and excited glances, clearly wondering what a partially sentient castle might mean for daily life at Hogwarts. "Isn't that potentially dangerous?" Hermione whispered. "Potentially fascinating," Pugsley corrected. "The castle has demonstrated remarkable restraint so far. I predict a period of cautious experimentation followed by increasingly confident self-expression." "In English?" Ron requested. "The castle will start with simple cleaning and maintenance, then gradually develop its own decorative preferences," Pugsley clarified. "Nothing too dramatic, at first." Harry wasn't sure whether to be excited or concerned about returning to a Hogwarts where the building itself might have opinions about its interior design. Still, after witnessing the castle's protective response to the Dementors, he felt a strange trust in the ancient structure's judgment. After breakfast, they accompanied Pugsley to the entrance hall, where Professor McGonagall waited to escort him to Hogsmeade Station. His small suitcase appeared to be moving slightly of its own accord, but everyone tactfully avoided mentioning this. "Well," Pugsley said, looking around the entrance hall with genuine fondness, "it's been educational." "That's one way of putting it," McGonagall replied dryly, though Harry noticed the hint of a smile on her normally stern face. "You'll write, won't you?" Hermione asked, surprising herself with the request. Despite her frequent disapproval of his methods, she had clearly developed a reluctant appreciation for Pugsley's unique perspective. "Of course," Pugsley assured her. "I'll send detailed updates on my future educational experiments." The family raven enjoys long-distance deliveries, gives him more opportunity to terrify local wildlife along the way. Ron stepped forward and awkwardly shook Pugsley's hand. "It's been weird," he said honestly. "But the good kind of weird, you know." "The highest compliment," Pugsley nodded appreciatively. Finally, Harry faced his strange friend, finding himself unexpectedly emotional. "Thanks for everything, Pugsley. This place won't be the same without you." "That's the idea," Pugsley replied with a wink. Then, more seriously, "You have a remarkable school here, Harry. It responds to those who understand its true nature, those who exist between worlds, as you do." Before Harry could ask what he meant, Pugsley turned to McGonagall. "One last educational demonstration, Professor. For the sake of a memorable departure." McGonagall looked suspicious but nodded cautiously. "Provided it doesn't cause structural damage or lasting psychological trauma." "Nothing of the sort," Pugsley assured her. He turned to face the entrance hall and raised his arms dramatically. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, every suit of armor in the hall came to attention, raising their metallic arms in perfect synchronization. The grand staircase rearranged its steps to form a pattern that, when viewed from above, resembled Pugsley's round face. The torches flared in a rainbow of colors, and a mysterious wind swept through the hall, carrying what sounded like a farewell song. Most impressive of all, the stone walls themselves seemed to ripple, as if the castle were taking a deep breath before settling back into stillness. It was subtle but unmistakable, Hogwarts was saying goodbye. "The castle likes you," Harry observed, impressed despite himself. "We understand each other," Pugsley agreed. Old buildings and Addamses have natural affinity. Both exist in the liminal spaces between what was and what could be. With final farewells and promises to write, Pugsley followed McGonagall out the front doors. As they disappeared down the path toward Hogsmeade, Harry, Ron, and Hermione stood watching from the steps. "You know," Ron said thoughtfully, "I have a feeling Hogwarts is going to seem really boring for a while." "Until Wednesday arrives next year," Hermione reminded him. "And apparently she makes Pugsley look normal." Harry smiled, patting the stone wall beside him affectionately. "Somehow, I think Hogwarts has a few surprises of its own in store for us now." Pugsley didn't just change the castle, he woke it up. As if in agreement, the stone beneath his hand warmed slightly, and the massive doors behind them creaked in what sounded suspiciously like satisfaction. Life at Hogwarts would never be quite the same again, and Harry couldn't wait to see what happened next. 3 weeks later, in the dead of night, Argus Filch crept through the silent halls of Hogwarts. He moved furtively, Mrs. Norris at his heels, pausing occasionally to listen for any sign that he'd been detected. He wasn't supposed to be here. He'd resigned, stormed out dramatically, been replaced by semi-sentient architecture and overeager house elves. But he couldn't stay away. 13 years of caring for these halls, these floors, these walls, it created a bond that couldn't be broken by mere rage. He needed to see how they were managing without him. Were the suits of armor being properly polished? Were the tapestries being dusted according to his meticulous schedule? Was anyone cleaning the underside of the staircases where spiderwebs gathered? As he turned a corner, he froze. Ahead of him, a suit of armor was moving, not marching or dancing as they had during the chaos of recent weeks, but methodically, deliberately, cleaning. It held a feather duster in one gauntlet hand and was carefully tending to a nearby portrait, whose occupant appeared to be giving instructions about mist spots. Filch stared in disbelief. Moving further down the corridor, he discovered more evidence of the castle's self-maintenance, a staircase that tilted slightly to allow dust to slide neatly into a waiting dustpan, gargoyles that repositioned themselves to direct rainwater away from vulnerable tapestries, torches that dimmed and brightened according to whether someone was present, conserving their magical fuel. "They don't need us anymore, my sweet," he whispered to Mrs. Norris, who meowed sorrowfully in response. "The castle's taking care of itself now." As if hearing his words, the corridor around him seemed to pause. The suit of armor stopped its dusting, the staircase settled back into position, and the torches brightened uniformly. For a moment, Filch thought he'd been spotted. Then, to his astonishment, the suit of armor turned, marched to a nearby closet, and returned with a familiar mop and bucket, his mop and bucket, the ones he'd left behind in his hasty departure. The armor held them out to him in what could only be described as a respectful gesture. "What's this?" Filch asked suspiciously. "Think I'll come back and work alongside enchanted metalware, do you?" The suit of armor didn't respond verbally, but it pushed the cleaning implements toward him again, more insistently. From around the corner came another armor, this one carrying his ring of keys. Then another, with his logbook of student infractions. And another, with Mrs. Norris's favorite cushion. "Is this some kind of joke?" Filch demanded, though his voice lacked its usual bite. In answer, the walls themselves seemed to shudder slightly, and words appeared briefly in the dust on a nearby window: "Co-maintenance." Filch stared at the message, then at the assembled suits of armor with their offerings, and finally down at Mrs. Norris, who was purring and rubbing against the leg of the armor holding her cushion. "Co-maintenance," he repeated slowly, testing the word. "The castle wants to work with me." The armor with his mop nodded its helmeted head. Despite himself, Filch felt a strange warmth in his chest, something he hadn't experienced in years. Recognition. Appreciation. The castle itself acknowledging his expertise and dedication. "Well," he said gruffly, taking the mop and bucket, "I suppose someone needs to show you lot the proper way to polish the banisters. You've missed all the undersides, haven't you?" Typical. The armor straightened, as if standing at attention, awaiting instruction. As Filch began explaining the correct technique for banister polishing to his new metallic assistants, he couldn't help feeling that perhaps this arrangement might work after all. The castle needed his expertise, and he needed Hogwarts, plain and simple. "Addams," he muttered under his breath, "I still hate you for this. But maybe, just maybe, you weren't entirely wrong." High above, in the headmaster's tower, Albus Dumbledore smiled as he watched the scene unfold in a special mirror. Beside him, a letter addressed to Pugsley Addams waited to be sent, containing news of the latest developments in Hogwarts' architectural awakening, and the unexpected return of its most dedicated caretaker. "Educational enhancement indeed," Dumbledore murmured, his eyes twinkling as he sealed the envelope. "I do believe we'll need to expand that exchange program significantly next year." The castle creaked in what sounded remarkably like agreement, and somewhere in the dungeons, Severus Snape awoke with a start as his desk rearranged itself into a more ergonomic configuration. Life at Hogwarts had indeed changed forever, and the adventures were just beginning. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.